Hey there, all you beautiful souls. I hope your day has been absolutely fantastic. It is a pleasure to have you back for yet another exciting episode. Today we are diving deep into a brand new scenario. What if Naruto joined Hogwarts and mastered the dark arts? During his timeskip training with Jiraiya, Naruto is embedded at Hogwarts as an intelligence asset to study Voldemort's Horcrux magic, which bears disturbing similarities to Tailed Beast's sealing. Arriving as an outsider who cannot use standard magic, Naruto discovers his chakra network is uniquely compatible with dark arts, magic powered by emotion, and will rather than precise wand movements. Under Severus Snape's reluctant mentorship, Naruto descends into forbidden techniques while Kurama's influence grows stronger with every dark art mastered. If this timeline sparks your curiosity, drop a comment down below. I would love to hear your take on it. And while you are here, make sure to explore the library of other intriguing what-ifs available on the channel. Alright, let us not keep you waiting any longer. Let us dive right into this thought-provoking video. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall reflected a perfect Scottish evening, stars scattered across a velvet sky, candles floating in silent suspension above four long house tables packed with students. At the head table, the faculty sat in their customary arrangement, Professor McGonagall's spectacles catching the candlelight as she observed the newest arrival with an expression hovering between curiosity and concern. Beside her, Professor Dumbledore's half-moon glasses revealed nothing of his thoughts, though the faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth suggested private amusement. In the center of the hall, standing on the stone floor before the entire school, Naruto Uzumaki held a wand for the first time in his life. The feather sat on the podium before him, small and white and utterly indifferent to his existence. Professor Flitwick, standing atop his customary stack of books, had explained the levitation charm with characteristic enthusiasm. The incantation had been simple, the wand movement straightforward, the theory basic magical fundamentals taught to first years in their opening weeks. Every eye in the Great Hall watched the exchange student who had arrived that morning under circumstances no one had properly explained, a boy with strange whisker marks on his cheeks, and an accent no one could place in clothing that looked like it belonged on a battlefield rather than a school. The wand felt wrong in Naruto's hand. Not wrong in the way a poorly balanced kunai felt wrong, something that could be adjusted with practice and familiarity. Wrong in the way water felt wrong when you tried to breathe it, fundamentally incompatible, a tool designed for a hand that was not his. He had felt this wrongness the moment Professor McGonagall had handed him the wand during his arrival, a simple testing instrument of vine wood and dragon heartstring that had vibrated unpleasantly against his palm. The chakra in his body, the life energy he had spent 15 years learning to shape and channel and weaponize, recoiled from the wood like oil separating from water. 3 weeks ago, Jiraiya had sat him down in a cramped safe house outside Tanzakugai and explained that his training was taking an unexpected turn. There was intelligence coming out of Britain about a dark wizard who had achieved a form of immortality by splitting his soul into multiple containers, binding fragments of his consciousness into objects and living beings alike. The technique bore disturbing similarities to Tailed Beast's sealing, binding multiple souls into single vessels, and the implications for Jinchuriki containment were too significant to ignore. Dumbledore, an old contact of the Third Hokage's intelligence network, had agreed to host a Konoha asset at his school for research purposes. Naruto would be embedded as a transfer student, studying this Horcrux magic while continuing his ninjutsu development under Jiraiya's remote supervision. Naruto had been excited, genuinely excited, at the prospect of something new. He had spent his entire life being underestimated in one village. Surely a school full of magic users would be different. Surely people who could reshape reality with words and wood would look at his shadow clones and Rasengan and see something worth respecting. Standing in the Great Hall with a dead piece of wood in his hand and a feather that would not move, Naruto understood that he had been catastrophically wrong. The incantation came out too loud, his voice carrying across the silent hall with the force of someone accustomed to shouting his intentions at the top of his lungs. The wand movement was too aggressive, a sharp jab rather than the elegant swish Flitwick had demonstrated. The result was neither levitation nor simple failure. The feather ignited with a sound like a firecracker detonating, blue-orange flames erupting from the shaft and consuming the delicate barbs in the span of a heartbeat. The fire leaped from the feather to the podium, then from the podium to the hem of Professor McGonagall's robes before she could react, and only a hastily conjured jet of water from Flitwick's wand prevented the situation from escalating into a full magical incident. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the laughter began. Draco Malfoy's voice cut through the hall with the practiced precision of someone who had been taught to weaponize mockery before he could walk. The sound echoed off the enchanted ceiling, joined quickly by the Slytherin table and then more hesitantly by students from other houses who had not yet decided what to make of the strange foreign boy but could recognize public humiliation when they saw it. Naruto stood in the center of the laughter, wand still raised, the acrid smell of burnt feather filling his nostrils, and felt something hot and familiar coil in his chest. The killing intent that rose in response to the laughter was instinctive, a shinobi's reflexive response to threat and disrespect drilled into him through years of training and combat and survival. The students closest to him felt it without understanding what they were feeling, a sudden pressure in the air that made their laughter falter and die. Draco Malfoy's smirk flickered uncertainly. But Naruto forced the intent back down before it could manifest fully, before the red chakra that always lurked at the edges of his consciousness could seep into his eyes and confirm every suspicion these strangers already harbored about him. He had been at Hogwarts for less than an hour. He had already set something on fire. He had already nearly revealed the demon sealed in his gut to a hall full of children who had never seen real violence in their lives. This was going to be a very long assignment. The week that followed established a pattern of failure so comprehensive that Naruto began to wonder if the universe had designed this school specifically to humble him. Potions, which he had approached with something resembling optimism given his experience with field medicine and poison preparation, proved equally impossible. The ingredients curdled in his presence, the cauldron temperature fluctuating wildly whenever his hands came near the pewter surface, and Snape had removed him from the classroom after his second attempt produced a cloud of toxic vapor that sent 3 students to the hospital wing. The potion's master's expression during the incident had been unreadable, but his eyes had tracked Naruto's movements with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something the other professors missed. Transfiguration was worse. McGonagall's precise instructions for transforming a matchstick into a needle produced nothing, not even the partial transformations that struggling first-years managed. The matchstick sat on Naruto's desk and remained stubbornly, defiantly, a matchstick. When he tried to force chakra through the wand as a substitute for whatever energy the other students were channeling, the matchstick simply exploded. McGonagall's expression, as she repaired the damage to her classroom with a flick of her wand, suggested that she had encountered many varieties of magical incompetence over her decades of teaching, but never anything quite like this. Charms was a disaster. Herbology was merely embarrassing, the venomous tentacula retreating from Naruto's touch as though sensing something dangerous in his proximity. Defense against the dark arts, taught by a woman in pink who radiated bureaucratic malice, was the only class where Naruto felt remotely competent, and that was only because the theoretical approach Professor Umbridge insisted upon required no wand work at all. The textbook she had assigned, a weighty tome on defensive magical theory that contained no actual defensive magic, was useless for practical purposes. But it was the first class where Naruto did not break anything, and that counted as a victory by the standards of his current existence. The other students treated him as a curiosity that was rapidly curdling into something less welcome. Hermione Granger had approached him on the second day with a stack of books and a dozen questions about chakra networks and energy manipulation, her academic enthusiasm undimmed by his obvious discomfort. She had read everything the Hogwarts library contained about non-European magical traditions, had cross-referenced accounts of key manipulation in East Asian magical practices, and had developed a theory that chakra represented an entirely distinct branch of magical expression that had evolved in isolation from wand-based traditions. Naruto understood perhaps one word in 3 of her rapid-fire analysis, but her genuine interest was the first positive interaction he had experienced since arriving, and he found himself answering her questions as best he could. Harry Potter had watched him from across the Great Hall with an expression Naruto recognized instinctively, the wariness of someone who had been marked as different from childhood and had learned to identify potential threats before they identified him. The scar on Harry's forehead, which Naruto had been briefed about by Jiraiya, pulsed with something that felt disturbingly familiar when their eyes met. A fragment of soul bound to a living vessel. The similarities between Harry's scar and Naruto's seal were the reason he was here, but feeling that resonance in person was different from reading about it in an intelligence report. They were mirrors of each other, 2 boys carrying darkness they had never asked for, and Naruto could tell that Harry sensed the connection as clearly as he did. Luna Lovegood had approached him on the 3rd day during a moment when he had retreated to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, seeking solitude from the stares and whispers that followed him through the corridors. Her approach had been dreamy and unhurried, her protuberant eyes fixed on something slightly to the left of his head. She had introduced herself in a voice that sounded like she was translating her thoughts from a language no one else spoke, and then she had said something that made his blood run cold. "You glow orange," she had said, tilting her head as though examining a particularly interesting specimen, like a fox made of sunset. "It is very pretty, but I do not think it is yours." Before Naruto could respond, she had drifted away, leaving him standing alone at the forest's edge, with the uncomfortable sensation that he had just been seen more clearly than he wanted to be. The fox made of sunset was Kurama, of course, the nine-tailed demon fox whose chakra saturated Naruto's own, whose consciousness lurked in the sealed space behind his navel, whose voice had been growing steadily louder over the past year of training. That a strange girl with radish earrings could perceive that presence when trained magical professors could not suggested abilities that Naruto's intelligence training had not prepared him for. Neville Longbottom had been the most relatable presence in the entire school. The round-faced Gryffindor had approached him in the common room on the fourth evening, when Naruto was staring at the fire and contemplating the logistics of simply abandoning the mission and returning to Jiraiya in disgrace. Neville had sat down beside him without preamble and said, in a voice that carried the weight of personal experience, that public magical failure got easier to bear after the first dozen times. He had melted his third cauldron in first year, had been launched across the greenhouse by an agitated fanged geranium, had once transfigured his own eyebrows into caterpillars that tried to crawl off his face. The specific disasters were different, but the experience of being the one everyone watched fail was universal. Naruto had found himself laughing for the first time since arriving, a genuine sound that felt foreign in his throat after days of frustration. Draco Malfoy took every opportunity to reinforce Naruto's outsider status. The Slytherin's commentary was relentless and precise, targeting every vulnerability with the expertise of someone who had been trained in psychological warfare since childhood. The exchange student who could not perform basic magic. The foreigner who claimed extraordinary abilities but demonstrated only extraordinary incompetence. The boy with the strange marks on his face who carried himself like a warrior but broke everything he touched. Each observation was delivered in public, each barb designed to draw laughter from Malfoy's sycophants and flush from Naruto's cheeks. The worst part was that none of it was technically wrong. Naruto had claimed he could create 1,000 copies of himself, could shape chakra into techniques that evaded magical categorization entirely, and none of it mattered because he could not prove it. His shadow clone jutsu worked perfectly when he performed it in private, the familiar burst of chakra and smoke producing exact duplicates with all the reliability he had come to depend on. But performing ninjutsu in front of wizards who had already dismissed him as a fraud felt like desperation, and Naruto's pride would not permit him to beg for their recognition. The defense against the dark arts practical examination was the breaking point. Professor Umbridge had insisted on a purely theoretical curriculum, but the third-year class she was supervising had petitioned for a practical demonstration of defensive techniques, and she had reluctantly permitted a single session under her direct supervision. The topic was boggarts, shape-shifting creatures that took the form of a person's deepest fear, and the counter was the ridiculous charm that transformed fear into humor. It was a standard second-year exercise, something every Hogwarts student had practiced, and Naruto had been assured that his participation was optional given his unique circumstances. He should have declined. Every instinct he had developed over 15 years of survival told him that facing a creature designed to manifest his greatest fear in front of an audience of hostile strangers was a catastrophically bad idea. But stubborn pride and accumulated frustration made him step forward when his name was called, made him face the wardrobe where the boggart rattled and shook, made him raise the wand that still felt like dead wood in his hand and prepare for whatever was about to emerge. The boggart burst from the wardrobe in a swirl of shadow and took a form that none of the watching students recognized. A massive fox, not orange but deep crimson, with 9 tails that lashed behind it like whips of living hatred. Its eyes were slitted and malevolent, its jaws large enough to swallow a man whole, its presence filling the classroom with a pressure that made the windows rattle in their frames. The boggart Kurama opened its mouth, and the sound that emerged was not laughter but a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, a sound of such profound malice that several students stumbled backward and one first year began to cry. Naruto did not cast ridiculous. The wand in his hand was useless for the kind of confrontation this situation demanded. What he did instead was drop into a combat stance that no one in the room recognized, his chakra flaring instinctively in response to a threat his body had been trained to face. The killing intent that he had suppressed during the sorting feast erupted now without constraint, the full weight of a Jinchuriki's battle presence pressing against the boggart's manifested form. The fox flickered, its shape destabilizing under the pressure of a will that had faced the real Kurama and survived. The standoff lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Then the boggart retreated into the wardrobe with a sound that might have been frustration or might have been fear, and the classroom filled with a silence more profound than any noise could have been. Professor Umbridge's expression was unreadable in a way that suggested furious calculations being performed behind her toad-like smile. The students stared at Naruto with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. The fox had been his fear, yes, but it had also been something else. It had been a truth he had been trying to hide since arriving, the darkness sealed inside him made visible, and now everyone had seen it. In the shadows at the back of the classroom, Severus Snape watched with an expression that contained neither surprise nor disapproval. He had been observing Naruto all week, tracking the foreign boy's movements through the castle, noting the way his presence affected potions and magical instruments, cataloging the fluctuations of energy that surrounded him like an invisible cloak. What he had seen confirmed a theory he had been developing since Dumbledore first informed him of the exchange student's arrival. The boy's power did not work through wands because wands were designed for external energy channeling, for drawing magic from the world and shaping it through precise incantations and movements. Naruto's power was internal, generated from within his own body, shaped by will and emotion rather than words and wood. And there was a branch of magic that operated on precisely those principles, magic powered by emotional intensity rather than academic precision, magic that had been forbidden not because it was inherently evil, but because it was inherently dangerous. Dark arts ran on emotion. Rage, hatred, domination, the absolute conviction in one's right to impose their will on reality. The same emotions that fueled the creature sealed inside the boy, that radiated from him in waves of killing intent whenever he was threatened, that made boggarts retreat rather than face what he was carrying. Snape made a decision that would have consequences he could not fully anticipate. As the classroom emptied and Naruto stood alone amid the scattered debris of the confrontation, the potion's master approached with the silent tread that made him a ghost in his own domain. He did not offer comfort or explanation. What he offered was an observation delivered in a voice that carried no judgment, only clinical assessment. The corridor where Snape finally cornered Naruto was deep in the dungeons, far from the traffic of students and the scrutiny of other professors. It was midnight, the castle settled into the quiet rhythms of sleep, and Naruto had been wandering the halls in the restless pattern of someone who could not bear the confinement of his own bed. The week of failures had accumulated into a weight that pressed against his chest, the laughter and the stares and the humiliation blending into a single throbbing ache of alienation. He had been underestimated in Konoha, had been hated and feared and dismissed as the demon brat who would never amount to anything. But he had always had his ninjutsu, his determination, his ability to prove the bastards wrong through sheer stubborn refusal to accept their definitions of him. Here, he had nothing. Here, he was exactly as useless as they believed. Snape emerged from the shadows with the suddenness of a man who had spent decades perfecting dramatic entrances. His black robes merged with the darkness until he was simply there, standing in Naruto's path with his arms folded and his expression unreadable. The torchlight caught the sallow planes of his face, the dark eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Snape bypassed the pleasantries entirely. He had been watching Naruto's practical failures with increasing interest, had observed the way his power fluctuated and recoiled from standard magical instruments. The boggart incident had confirmed his suspicions, revealing not just what Naruto carried inside him, but how that power expressed itself when conventional magic failed. His power did not work through wands because he had been trained to channel it through will rather than wood, to shape energy through emotional focus and physical discipline rather than incantations and precise movements. There was a branch of magic that operated the same way, that had always operated the same way, magic that the ministry had declared unforgivable precisely, because it did not require wands or words or any of the civilized trappings that made magic safe and controllable. If Naruto was interested in not being useless, Snape's office would be open at midnight. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them fully understood, and then Snape was gone, his robes swirling behind him as he disappeared into the darkness from which he had emerged. Naruto stood alone in the dungeon corridor for a long time after the potion's master departed. The offer was dangerous, he understood that much instinctively. Whatever branch of magic Snape was referring to, It was clearly forbidden, clearly outside the bounds of what the school officially permitted. Jiraiya had sent him here to gather intelligence on Horcruxes, to study the mechanics of soul fragmentation and vessel binding, not to learn techniques that might destabilize the seal or strengthen Kurama's influence. Accepting secret lessons from a man whose loyalties were still being evaluated by the Order of the Phoenix was exactly the kind of risk that Naruto's training should have taught him to avoid. But he was desperate. The admission burned in his chest like swallowed acid, but it was true. He was desperate to prove himself, to be useful, to complete his mission and return to Jiraiya with something valuable. He was desperate to stop being the boy everyone laughed at, the foreign curiosity who broke everything he touched. He was desperate to find something in this strange castle of magic and stone that made his years of training mean something. And beneath the desperation, buried so deep he could pretend it was not there, was something else. A hunger, a curiosity, a voice that sounded disturbingly like Kurama's, asking what it would feel like to channel power that matched the rage he had been carrying his entire life. The night before his scheduled meeting with Snape, Naruto found himself standing outside the potions master's office an hour early. He had not intended to come early. His feet had carried him here while his mind was occupied with other things, and now he stood in the cold corridor with his fist half raised to knock and his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the heavy oak door, he heard voices. Snape's voice was low and measured, the tone of someone delivering a report that he found personally distasteful but professionally necessary. He described Naruto's chakra network as essentially a dark arts conduit waiting to be activated, a system designed to channel emotional energy into physical manifestation. Whatever was sealed inside the boy had been feeding him killing intent since childhood, had been shaping his magical development in ways that standard Hogwarts instruction could never address. The boy could cast the unforgivables tomorrow if someone showed him how. The capacity was already there, waiting only for the technique. A pause, then Dumbledore's voice, calm and curious in a way that suggested he had already reached his own conclusions and was merely confirming them. He asked if someone would show him, if Severus intended to be the one who taught the boy what his power was truly capable of. The door swung open before Snape could answer. Naruto stood frozen in the doorway, his fist still raised, his expression caught between defiance and fear. The two men regarded him with expressions that revealed nothing and everything. Dumbledore's half-moon glasses glittered in the candlelight, his blue eyes carrying the weight of a century's worth of difficult decisions. Snape's dark gaze was unreadable, but something in the set of his jaw suggested that he had known Naruto was listening and had chosen his words accordingly. Snape invited him inside, stepping back from the doorway with a gesture that was neither welcoming nor hostile. It appeared they had much to discuss. Naruto crossed the threshold into the office, the door swinging shut behind him with a finality that sounded like the closing of a cage. The room was lined with shelves of pickled specimens and ancient texts, the air thick with the astringent scent of potion ingredients and something older, something that smelled like secrets. Dumbledore sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, his posture relaxed in a way that Naruto's shinobi training recognized as deceptive. The old man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with wands or spells, and he was watching Naruto with an expression that suggested he was seeing far more than the boy wanted to show. Snape's office at midnight, and Naruto Uzumaki sitting across from two of the most dangerous wizards in Britain, about to make a choice that would define everything that followed. The candle flames flickered as though sensing the weight of the moment, and somewhere deep in the recesses of Naruto's mind, Kurama laughed. The fox had been waiting for this, had known it was coming since the moment Naruto first stepped into the Great Hall and felt the wrongness of the wand in his hand. Darkness recognizing darkness, power calling to power, and the seal that kept the Nine Tails bound cracking just a little wider with every step Naruto took toward the abyss. He did not know it yet, but the descent had already begun. The dark arts are not spells. This was the first thing Severus Snape said when Naruto arrived at the dungeon classroom at midnight, the stone walls slick with condensation and the torches burning low and green. They are emotions given lethal form, Snape continued, his robes sweeping the floor as he paced before a chalkboard covered in diagrams that looked more like anatomical studies than magical theory. The killing curse requires absolute, unambiguous, joyful desire to end life. Not anger, not desperation, not even hatred exactly. It requires a specific pleasure in the act of extinguishing another's existence, a moment of perfect unity between intent and action where you want someone dead more than you have ever wanted anything, and you are happy about wanting it. Most wizards spend years building that capacity. Most wizards fail. He stopped pacing and turned to face Naruto directly, his dark eyes reflecting the green torchlight in a way that made him look momentarily inhuman. You, however, have spent your entire life with a demon in your soul feeding you hatred and killing intent. The nine-tailed fox has been whispering in your ear since the day you were born, filling your chakra network with its malice, shaping your emotional responses to threat and conflict in ways you probably do not even consciously recognize. Tell me, Mr. Uzumaki, when you channel the nine-tails chakra, when you let that power flood your system and override your natural limits, do you ever want to destroy everything? The pause before Naruto answered stretched long enough to become its own confession. He sat rigid in the wooden chair, his hands gripping his knees, his jaw tight. The question cut through every rationalization he had constructed since arriving at Hogwarts, every careful story he told himself about why he was here and what he was willing to do. He thought of the Valley of the End, of the chakra cloak manifesting against his will, of Sasuke's horrified expression as Naruto's features twisted into something feral and hungry. He thought of the bridge in Wave Country, the first time he had ever accessed the fox's power deliberately, the intoxicating rush of strength that made everything seem small and fragile and wonderfully breakable. He thought of all the moments since then, the hundreds of times the fox's chakra had surged through his coils and brought with it a clarity of purpose that normal Naruto never possessed. The clarity of wanting to hurt, to dominate, to end. Sometimes, Naruto said finally, his voice quieter than it had been all week, not all the time, but sometimes when I'm angry enough, when someone I care about is in danger, when I need the power to protect them. There's this moment where protecting people and hurting people start to feel like the same thing. Snape's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. That moment, he said, is the killing curse waiting to be born. The Cruciatus curse operates on a similar principle, but requires a different emotional fuel. It is not enough to want someone to suffer for strategic reasons. You must take genuine pleasure in their pain. You must find their agony satisfying in a way that transcends any practical purpose. The Imperious curse demands absolute will to dominate, to overwrite another's autonomy so completely that your desires become their reality. Each unforgivable curse is powered by a specific emotional state, and the reason they are unforgivable is not merely because of what they do to the victim. It is because of what they require from the caster. He turned back to the chalkboard and began sketching, his wand tracing glowing lines through the air that hung suspended like ghostly diagrams. Your chakra network, as I have observed it, operates on emotional channeling by design. Ninjutsu requires will and intent shaped by hand signs. Genjutsu requires the projection of your consciousness into another's sensory perception. Even your most basic techniques rely on emotional focus rather than external magical channeling. This is why wands reject you. Wands are designed to draw magic from ambient sources and focus it through precise movements and incantations. Your body has never learned to process magic that way because your magic, your chakra, is internal. It comes from you, from your life force, from your emotions, from the demons sealed in your gut. The ghostly diagram now showed two overlapping systems, one labeled with arcane symbols and one with chakra pathway markers. Naruto recognized the 8 trigram seal at the center, the intricate locking mechanism that kept Kurama bound within him. Snape had drawn it with disturbing accuracy, as though he had been studying it for weeks. Dark arts are the only branch of Western magic that operates on internal emotional fuel rather than external channeling, Snape continued. This is why dark wizards can cast wandlessly more easily than other practitioners. This is why dark magic corrupts its users. The emotional states required to cast these spells are not sustainable for a healthy psyche. The more you use them, the more you must access those states, and the more those states become your default response to stress, conflict, and threat. You become what you pretend to be, Mr. Uzumaki, and dark magic requires you to pretend to be a monster often enough that the pretending eventually stops. Naruto absorbed this in silence. The green torchlight made the dungeon feel underwater, drowning in something thick and slow. He thought about what it meant that he had already felt those emotional states, that the fox had been feeding them to him for years, that the capacity for darkness was not something he needed to develop, but something he needed to learn to control. He thought about the mission, about Horcruxes, about the fact that understanding dark magic was supposedly necessary for understanding how Voldemort had split his soul. He thought about how none of that felt like the real reason he was sitting here anymore. Snape continued the lesson with brutal efficiency, laying out the theoretical framework for each unforgivable curse with the clinical detachment of someone who had spent decades studying things he wished he had never learned. The killing curse required a state of perfect murderous intent, a moment where the desire to end life became indistinguishable from joy. The Cruciatus curse was powered by sadistic pleasure, by the satisfaction of causing suffering, by the dark exhilaration of holding another being's agony in your hands like a weapon you had forged yourself. The imperious curse demanded the absolute conviction that your will should supersede another's, that your desires mattered more than their autonomy. That domination was not merely necessary but righteous. Naruto listened and felt the fox stirring in response. Not words, not yet, but a kind of pleased rumbling that vibrated through the seal and into his bones. Kurama recognized these emotions. Kurama had been these emotions for 1,000 years. Every time Snape described the state required for a particular curse, Naruto could feel the fox's chakra pulse in recognition, as though the demon was saying, "Yes, this is what I am, this is what we could be together." The lesson ended at 2 in the morning. Naruto walked back to his assigned quarters through corridors lit only by flickering sconces, his shadow stretching long and distorted against the stone walls. His hands were trembling, and he did not know whether it was from fear or anticipation. The pattern established itself quickly. 3 nights a week, Naruto would slip out of his quarters and make his way to the dungeons, where Snape would be waiting with new diagrams and increasingly disturbing practical demonstrations. The lessons remained theoretical for the first 2 weeks, Snape insisting that understanding must precede practice, that the emotional architecture of dark magic needed to be fully comprehended before any attempt was made to access it. Naruto learned the history of the unforgivable curses, their origins in medieval blood feuds and dark rituals, their refinement over centuries by wizards who had pushed the boundaries of what magic could achieve. He learned about the wizards who had mastered them and been destroyed by them, case studies in corruption that Snape presented with the weary familiarity of someone who had seen too many students walk too close to the edge. During the day, Naruto attended regular classes and continued to fail at standard magic. The contrast was becoming unbearable. In charms, he could not levitate a feather. In transfiguration, he could not turn a matchstick into a needle. In potions, his very presence seemed to curdle ingredients, as though the dark energy he was studying at night was leaking into his daytime existence and poisoning everything it touched. His fellow students had stopped treating him as a curiosity and started treating him as an active nuisance, someone whose failures slowed down lessons and whose foreignness made him fundamentally incompatible with Hogwarts education. Draco Malfoy had made a sport of it, mocking Naruto's every failed spell with the practiced cruelty of someone who had been trained in verbal abuse since childhood. Most of the other students simply ignored him, the way one ignores a problem that has no solution and no relevance to one's own life. Only a few still engaged with him. Hermione had become obsessed with understanding his chakra system, her academic fascination slowly transforming into something more personal. She would corner him after classes with questions about chakra nature transformation, about hand signs, about the relationship between physical and spiritual energy. Naruto answered what he could, grateful for the attention even as he recognized that her interest was primarily intellectual. She was studying him the way she studied everything, as a puzzle to be solved, a system to be mapped. But there was warmth there too, buried under the academic rigor, and Naruto found himself looking forward to their conversations in a way that felt increasingly fragile. He knew what she would say if she found out about the midnight lessons. He knew the look that would cross her face when she realized what he was learning. Harry remained wary, his distrust manifesting as formal politeness that was somehow worse than open hostility. Naruto recognized the look in Harry's eyes because he had seen it in mirrors. It was the look of someone who carried darkness against his will and saw that same darkness reflected in another person. Harry's scar, Naruto had learned from Dumbledore's oblique references, contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul, a Horcrux unintended but real binding Harry to the Dark Lord in ways neither fully understood. Harry could sense something in Naruto, something that resonated with the fragment in his scar, and that resonance made him keep his distance. He was not hostile. He was careful. He was watching Naruto the way one watches a pot about to boil over, waiting for the moment when watching would no longer be enough. Luna Lovegood continued to see things others did not. She had taken to sitting near Naruto during meals, her protuberant silver eyes tracking his movements with an attention that was neither judgmental nor entirely comfortable. "The orange is bleeding," she told him one afternoon, her voice dreamy and matter-of-fact. "There is red at the edges now, like a sunset that knows it is about to become night." Naruto had no idea what to say to that, so he said nothing, and Luna seemed to find his silence perfectly acceptable. She patted his hand with her small, cool fingers and returned to her pudding as though she had not just described the visual manifestation of his soul's slow corruption. Neville Longbottom remained an unexpected source of solidarity, the only student who seemed to understand that public magical failure was not proof of worthlessness. They had bonded, in their strange way, over exploding cauldrons and botched transfigurations, and the particular humiliation of being the worst in a class where everyone else made it look easy. Neville did not know about the midnight lessons, did not sense the darkness accumulating in Naruto's chakra, did not see the red bleeding into the orange. He just saw another boy who was trying his best and failing, and he offered the simple kindness of not making that failure worse. The breaking point came 3 weeks into Snape's instruction. Naruto was sitting in the dungeon classroom, listening to Snape describe the emotional architecture of the Cruciatus Curse in exhaustive detail, when something shifted inside him. It was not a decision. It was more like a door opening, or a dam cracking, or a seal loosening just enough to let something through. Snape was describing the specific quality of pleasure required to sustain the curse, the way the caster had to find the victim's pain genuinely satisfying, and Naruto realized he could feel it. Not the desire to cause pain, not the willingness to use pain as a tool, but the actual pleasure of it. The fox's pleasure, Kurama's thousand-year enjoyment of destruction, filtered through the seal and into Naruto's emotional awareness. He did not cast the curse, he did not even try, but he could feel how easy it would be, how natural, how right. The capacity was there, waiting for him to access it, and the only thing holding him back was the thin barrier of his own reluctance. A barrier that was growing thinner every day, worn away by humiliation and isolation, and the growing conviction that this was the only magic that would ever work for him. Snape noticed, of course he noticed. His dark eyes sharpened and he set down the chalk with the careful deliberation of someone who had just seen something both expected and terrible. "You felt it," he said. "It was not a question. The Cruciatus. You accessed the emotional state without casting. You know what it would take now, and you know that you are capable of providing it." Naruto nodded, his throat too tight for words. The fox's chakra was still pulsing through his coils, warm and heavy and darkly comforting. It felt like coming home to a house that was on fire, knowing that the flames would destroy you eventually, but being grateful for the warmth in the meantime. Snape studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he dismissed him early, something he had never done before, and Naruto walked back through the dark corridors with the fox's laughter echoing in his mind. Not words, not yet, but getting closer. The seal was cracking. The red was bleeding into the orange, and somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, Kurama was pleased. Hermione found out 3 days later. Naruto had been careless, leaving his notes from Snape's lessons in his bag, and Hermione had borrowed the bag to look for a quill and found pages covered in diagrams of the unforgivable curses and their emotional requirements. She confronted him in an empty classroom, her voice shaking with a mixture of horror and betrayal. She demanded to know what he was doing, why he was studying this, whether he understood what dark magic did to people who used it. Her eyes were wet, and Naruto realized with a jolt that she was not just angry. She was afraid. Afraid for him, afraid of him, afraid of what he was becoming. He tried to explain. The mission, the Horcruxes, the need to understand dark magic in order to counter it. But the explanations sounded hollow even to his own ears, rationalizations constructed after the fact to justify a path he had chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with intelligence gathering. Hermione was not fooled. She had researched dark magic extensively since learning of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and she knew the pattern. Every dark wizard who achieved rapid mastery of the unforgivable curses had destroyed themselves. Not eventually, inevitably. The magic consumed them because the emotional states it required were inherently corrupting. You could not spend years accessing sadistic pleasure and murderous joy, an absolute will to dominate without those states becoming your default. You became what you practiced being, and dark magic required you to practice being a monster. "You are becoming what you are trying to fight," Hermione said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Naruto had no response. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was different, that his chakra network and the fox's influence and his shinobi training made him immune to the corruption that had destroyed every other dark wizard in history. But he could not say it because he did not believe it, and Hermione could see the lie before it even formed. She left without another word, and the door closing behind her sounded like the end of something that had barely had time to begin. The days that followed were isolation of a new and terrible kind. Hermione stopped speaking to him entirely, her gaze sliding past him in the great hall as though he had become invisible. Harry's wariness deepened into something closer to active avoidance. Luna continued to watch him with those protuberant silver eyes, but her comments had shifted from whimsical to ominous. "There is more red now," she said, "and less orange. The fox is winning and you are letting it." Only Neville remained unchanged, too focused on his own struggles to notice the darkness gathering around his friend. And Snape, of course. Snape continued the lessons, pushing Naruto deeper into the theory of the unforgivable curses. never quite crossing the line into practical instruction but coming closer every session. Naruto could feel himself approaching a threshold, a point where understanding would become action and action would become irreversible. The Hogsmeade weekend arrived cold and bright, the first real snow of winter dusting the roofs of the village and turning the street into a treacherous sheet of packed ice. Students flooded out of Hogwarts in chattering clusters, their breath pluming white in the frigid air, their wands producing warming charms that Naruto could not replicate. He walked alone at the edge of the group, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face set in the careful neutrality of someone who had stopped expecting to belong. Hermione was ahead of him with Ron and Harry, her bushy hair dusted with snowflakes, her laughter carrying back to him on the wind. She had not looked at him once. The attack came without warning. One moment the street was filled with students browsing shop windows and sipping butterbeer. The next moment black-robed figures were apparating into the village with cracks that split the air like gunshots, their masks gleaming bone-white in the winter sun, their wands already raised and spitting green light. Death Eaters. A dozen of them at least, materializing in the middle of Hogsmeade with the casual confidence of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. Panic erupted instantly. Students screamed and scattered, some fumbling for wands, others freezing in place, their faces slack with shock. Aurors who had been stationed in the village for security began trading curses with the attackers, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. The Death Eaters moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down anyone who resisted and herding the rest toward the center of the street. Naruto saw a curse hit a fourth-year Hufflepuff and watched the boy crumple, his limbs spasming, blood streaming from his nose. He saw a shop window explode inward, showering the street with glass. He saw Hermione, her wand out, her face pale but determined, standing between a group of younger students and two advancing Death Eaters. She was trying to shield them. She was trying to protect them with spells she had learned from books and practiced in classrooms, spells that had never been tested in real combat. And she was failing. The Death Eaters were too experienced, too ruthless, too willing to use magic that Hermione would not even consider. One of them raised his wand, and Naruto saw the curse forming on his lips, the sickly yellow-green light of something designed to maim rather than kill, and he knew with absolute certainty that Hermione was not going to block it in time. Instinct took over, not the instinct of a Hogwarts student, not the instinct of a shinobi. Something deeper, something older, something that had been waiting in the fox's chakra for exactly this moment. Naruto reached for the emotional state Snape had described so many times, the perfect murderous intent, the joyful desire to end life, the absolute conviction that his enemy should not exist. And it was there. It had been there the whole time, cultivated by years of channeling Kurama's malice, refined by weeks of theoretical preparation, waiting only for the moment when he would stop holding back. The killing curse erupted from his outstretched hand without a wand, without an incantation, without anything but raw will and chakra and the fox's killing intent. Green light, brilliant and terrible, lancing across the distance between Naruto and the Death Eater in less than a heartbeat. It struck the masked figure square in the chest. The Death Eater's own curse died on his lips, his wand arm dropping, his body toppling backward with the boneless finality of something that had been alive and was alive no longer. The green light faded, but Naruto could still feel it tingling in his fingertips, could still feel the rightness of it, the satisfaction, the joy. He had cast the killing curse, wandless, wordless, effortless, and it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. The street went silent. Even the other Death Eaters paused, their masked faces turning toward the foreign boy with the red-orange eyes and the flickering green light still dancing at his fingertips. Hermione was staring at him, her wand half raised, her expression frozen in an emotion that Naruto could not name because he had never seen it directed at him before. She looked at him the way she would look at a monster, the way she would look at something that had been pretending to be human and had finally shown its true face. The remaining Death Eaters began to retreat, their mission disrupted, their losses unexpected. Aurors were converging from all directions now, reinforcements arriving through apparition and portkey, and the attackers clearly had no intention of being captured. They vanished one by one, the cracks of their departure echoing off the snow-dusted buildings, leaving behind their dead comrade and a street full of witnesses who had just seen a wandless foreign student cast an unforgivable curse with the casual ease of someone for whom darkness was not a choice but a nature. Naruto stood over the body, the green light finally fading from his fingers, his eyes still flickering between blue and red. Hermione was still staring. Harry had arrived at some point, his wand out, his scar visible beneath his pushback hair, his expression a complicated mixture of recognition and horror. He knew what Naruto had done. He knew what it had required. And he knew, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant that Naruto had been able to do it at all. When the Order of the Phoenix arrived, they found Naruto exactly where he had been standing since the curse connected. Kneeling now, his hands braced on his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what he had done began to settle in. The killing curse. He had cast the killing curse. He had killed a man, not in the heat of battle with a Rasengan or a shadow clone or any of the techniques he had spent years mastering, but with magic, dark magic, the darkest magic. And the worst part, the part that made his stomach clench and his hands shake and the fox laugh in the depths of his mind, was that it had felt good. Jiraiya was there. Naruto did not know when his mentor had arrived, but suddenly the Toad Sage was kneeling beside him, his large hand warm on Naruto's shoulder, his face carrying an expression Naruto had never seen before. It was not disappointment, it was not anger. It was grief, pure and raw, the grief of someone who had watched a child walk into darkness and had only now realized how deep the shadows went. The Order secured the area, the Aurors took statements, the dead Death Eater was removed from the street by officials whose faces were carefully blank. Naruto sat on the steps of Hanajuku's, wrapped in a blanket someone had given him, his hands still trembling, his mind still replaying the moment of the curse over and over. The green light. The perfect conviction. The joy. The fox's chakra was quiet now, sated in a way that made Naruto feel physically ill. He was summoned to Dumbledore's office an hour later. The fire was crackling in the hearth, the portraits of former headmasters watching with painted eyes, the silver instruments on the shelves spinning and puffing with delicate precision. Snape was there, standing near the window with his arms crossed, his expression as unreadable as ever. Jiraiya sat in one of the high-backed chairs, his posture slouched in a way that suggested exhaustion rather than relaxation. Several other Order members were present, their faces a blur of concern and calculation and barely concealed alarm. Dumbledore spoke first, his voice calm in a way that made the words somehow worse. What Naruto had done should not be possible, he said. Wandless, wordless, unforgivable curses required decades of practice, required a depth of dark magical conditioning that even most Death Eaters never achieved. Naruto had been studying dark arts for less than a month, and yet he had cast the killing curse as naturally as breathing. Naruto met the old wizard's eyes and said the only thing he could think of that was true. He did not mean to, it just happened. The words felt flimsy even as he spoke them, a child's excuse for an adult's sin. From the corner, Snape's voice cut through the silence like a blade. No, he said. No, Mr. Uzumaki, you meant it. The killing curse cannot be cast by accident, it cannot be cast without intent. When you killed that Death Eater, you wanted him dead with every fiber of your being. You were happy about wanting it. You achieved the emotional state that most dark wizards spend a lifetime pursuing, and you did it in 3 weeks. That is the problem, not that you killed a Death Eater. That you meant it completely, and you did not even realize you were capable of that. Snape turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years explaining uncomfortable truths to people who did not want to hear them. The question now, he said, is whether we report this to the ministry, whether we have the boy arrested for using an unforgivable curse, whether we make him a pariah and a fugitive and confirm every fear he has about belonging nowhere, or whether I teach him properly before he kills someone by accident, before his control slips, before the demon inside him decides to stop asking permission. The room went silent. Jiraiya's face had gone pale beneath its tan, his hands gripping the arms of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. He looked at Naruto, and Naruto saw in his mentor's eyes the same question he was asking himself. What am I becoming, and what will be left of me when the transformation is complete? Dumbledore regarded Naruto over the tops of his half-moon glasses, his blue eyes carrying the terrible weight of someone who had made impossible choices before and would make them again. You cast the killing curse today to save a friend, he said quietly. That is not nothing. That is not evil, but Severus is right about one thing. You meant it completely. And meaning it so easily, so quickly, so naturally, that is what should frighten you more than anything else you learned about yourself tonight. Naruto looked down at his hands. They had stopped glowing green, but he could still feel the curse there, waiting beneath his skin, ready to be called up again the next time someone he loved was in danger. The fox was quiet, but its silence felt like anticipation. The descent had begun, and there was no climbing back. Only the question of how far he would fall and who he would take with him. In the corridor outside Dumbledore's office, pressed against the wall with her hand over her mouth, Hermione Granger had heard every word. The tears on her cheeks were cold, and her expression was the expression of someone watching a friend walk toward a cliff with no intention of stopping. She did not know if she could save him. She did not know if he wanted to be saved. But she knew, with the terrible clarity of someone who had researched dark magic extensively, that the pattern was already in motion. Every dark wizard who had reached this point had destroyed themselves. every single one. And Naruto Uzumaki, the boy with the fox's chakra and the killing intent woven into his very soul, was moving faster than any of them. The spell came out green and perfect, wandless, wordless, effortless. The practice dummy, enchanted to simulate a living target, stopped moving, its constructed life snuffed out with the casual ease of a candle being pinched between wet fingers. Naruto lowered his hand, breathing hard but not from exhaustion, from exhilaration. The dungeon classroom had been cleared of desks and transformed into a training space. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting long shadows that danced and twisted as if trying to escape. Snape stood in the corner, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who had spent years learning not to react to things that should provoke a reaction. That was the 15th consecutive killing curse without fatigue, Snape observed, his voice carrying the flatness of a clinical report. Most dark wizards collapse after 3. Your chakra reserves combined with the Ninetales' energy make you efficient. Efficient, Naruto repeated, turning to his teacher with a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. There was something off about the expression, something that pulled at the corners too tightly and left the center hollow. That is good, right? Snape did not answer. In the torchlight, Naruto's shadow seemed to possess too many tails, spreading across the stone floor like spilled ink with a mind of its own. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of flames and the distant sound of the castle settling into its ancient bones. The lessons had shifted 3 weeks prior, moving from theory into practice with the inevitability of a stone rolling downhill. The Order had debated for 2 full days after the Hogsmeade incident, voices raised and tempers flaring. Jiraiya had argued for pulling Naruto out entirely, returning him to the elemental nations where his abilities could be monitored and contained. Sirius Black, still in hiding but present via enchanted mirror, had suggested that the boy needed therapy, not more dark arts training. Molly Weasley had demanded that Dumbledore shut the entire operation down, her maternal instincts overriding her tactical judgment. But Snape had won the argument with a single, devastating observation. The boy has already cast the killing curse. He can cast it without a wand, without an incantation, without any of the safeguards that normally prevent children from becoming murderers. If we do not teach him control, the next time he loses his temper, someone will die. Perhaps not a Death Eater, perhaps a student who insults him, perhaps a professor who gives him a failing grade, perhaps one of you. The room had fallen silent after that, the weight of the words pressing down on everyone present. Dumbledore had agreed with visible reluctance, and the practical lessons had commenced the following evening. Now Naruto stood in the transformed dungeon, having cast the killing curse more times in a single session than most dark wizards managed in a lifetime, and the only thing he felt was the strange, buzzing satisfaction of a muscle being exercised after too long dormant. Again, Snape said. The dummy repaired itself, magic knitting its simulated essence back together. Naruto raised his hand, and the fox stirred in the back of his mind, its chakra already surging forward to meet his intent. The killing intent, the absolute desire to end life, was no longer something he had to reach for. It was simply there, waiting like a loyal dog eager for its master's command. The curse erupted from his palm, green and silent, and the dummy stopped moving. 16. The next phase of the training began the following week. Snape introduced the Cruciatus curse with the same clinical detachment he had brought to the killing curse, but there was something different in his demeanor, something that suggested even he was approaching the limits of his ability to rationalize what he was doing. The Cruciatus requires genuine sadistic pleasure, he explained, standing before a conjured animal, a creature that had never lived and could not truly suffer but still writhed when the curse struck it. You must want to cause pain, Mr. Uzumaki, not because it serves a purpose, not because it is necessary, because you enjoy it. The fox, I suspect, will be helpful in this regard. Naruto felt Kurama stir at the mention, a rumble of dark amusement echoing through his consciousness. The fox had been more active lately, its presence less a distant threat and more a constant companion. Where once it had raged and threatened, now it whispered and suggested. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Channel my chakra, the fox purred, and I will show you pleasure and pain that you cannot imagine. Naruto closed his eyes, reached for the red chakra, and let the killing intent transform into something crueler. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer blue. They were amber, slit-pupiled, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with malice. The conjured creature began to scream. He mastered the Cruciatus in 4 days. The imperious curse took 2. It required total will to dominate another's mind, the absolute conviction that your desires should override another's autonomy, and Naruto had been channeling Kurama's will for weeks now. The fox did not ask. The fox did not negotiate. The fox simply imposed itself upon reality and expected reality to comply. Naruto learned to do the same. By the end of the first month of practical training, Snape had stopped giving lessons and started simply observing as Naruto developed techniques on his own. The boy's capacity for innovation was, in its own way, as terrifying as his natural aptitude for dark arts. The first cursed jutsu emerged from a moment of frustration. Naruto had been attempting to cast Avada Kedavra through a shadow clone, but the clone's chakra construct could not maintain the emotional intensity required. The curse fizzled, the clone dispersed, and Naruto slammed his fist against the stone wall hard enough to crack the masonry. Kurama laughed. "You are thinking of the clone as separate from yourself. It is not. It is you, all of you, including me." The realization struck with the force of a physical blow. When Naruto created shadow clones, he divided his chakra, his consciousness, his will. And now, with Kurama's chakra so thoroughly integrated into his own, he was dividing the fox as well. Every clone carried a fragment of the Nine-Tails' malice, its killing intent, its capacity for dark arts. He created a single clone and stood beside it, both of them raising their hands simultaneously. The killing intent flowed through both bodies, identical and perfect. Two voices spoke the incantation in perfect synchronization, and two green bolts of light struck the practice dummy from different angles. Snape, watching from the shadows, felt something he had not experienced in years. Genuine fear, not for himself but for what was being created in this dungeon. A boy who could multiply himself and grant each copy the ability to cast unforgivable curses was not a student. He was a weapon. The Rasengan came next. Naruto had been practicing the technique in his spare time, the familiar rotation of chakra a comfort amid the darkness of his secret studies. But the comfort was fading. The blue sphere of spinning energy felt incomplete now, insufficient, like a blade that had not been sharpened. "Mix them," Kurama suggested one night, its voice silky and persuasive. "Your spinning sphere and my malice. The Cruciatus energy does not have to be a separate thing. It can be infused into what you already know, what you already trust." The experimentation took 3 weeks of secret practice, away from Snape's supervision, away from anyone who might try to stop him. When the first Cruciatus-infused Rasengan formed in his palm, its color shifted from blue to deep crimson, and the sound it made was not the familiar hum of spinning chakra, but a low, keening wail that seemed to come from somewhere far away and nowhere at all. He tested it on a conjured creature, and the thing made sounds no living thing should make, its constructed nervous system firing agony signals even as its body began to dissolve. The Rasengan did not kill quickly. It killed slowly, painfully, sadistically, and Naruto watched with an expression that was entirely blank. The dungeon door creaked open behind him. Hermione stood in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She had been researching in the library, pursuing her own investigation into the history of dark arts corruption. The pattern she had found was devastating. Every dark wizard who had achieved rapid mastery had destroyed themselves. Not eventually, inevitably. The power burned through them like wildfire through dry grass, leaving nothing but ash and memory. She had been searching for Naruto to share her findings, to beg him to stop before it was too late. Instead, she found him standing over the twitching remains of a creature whose suffering had been extended far beyond any necessity, his face empty of the warmth that had once defined him. "How long have you been watching?" he asked, and his voice was calm in a way that was worse than anger. "Long enough," she whispered. "Long enough to know I do not know who you are anymore." She left before he could respond. The Rasengan faded, but the red light lingered in his palm like a stain that would not wash out. Hermione did not speak to him again for a long time, and the silence was heavier than any conversation could have been. Luna Lovegood found him 3 days later in the astronomy tower, staring at the stars with an expression she recognized all too well. She had been watching his aura shift for weeks now, the brilliant orange of the fox giving way to something darker, something red, something that pulsed with a hunger that was not his own. "The orange is almost gone now," she said, settling onto the stone bench beside him with the unself-conscious grace of someone who had never learned to be afraid of the things others feared. "There is red at the edges, spreading inward. The fox is winning." Naruto did not look at her. Maybe the fox was always winning. Maybe I was just too stubborn to notice. "The fox is not winning because it is stronger than you," Luna said, her voice carrying the dreamy certainty that made people dismiss her until they learned better. "It is winning because you have stopped fighting it. There is a difference. The difference matters." She left him with that thought, drifting away into the darkness of the castle with the same ethereal quality she brought to everything. Naruto sat alone for another hour, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling Kurama's presence humming in the back of his mind like a second heartbeat. The fox was no longer a prisoner. It was a partner, and that was more dangerous than any escape could have been. The order mission came 2 weeks later. Death Eaters had been spotted near a small village in the Scottish Highlands, targeting a family known to be connected to the Order. The intelligence was solid, the window of opportunity narrow, and Dumbledore made the decision to deploy a strike team. Naruto was included over the objections of several Order members because his abilities had become too valuable to leave behind. The mission went wrong almost immediately. The Death Eaters had been expecting an attack, and the small village became a battlefield. Spells lit the night sky in colors that would have been beautiful if they were not lethal. Curses and countercurses clashed in midair, and Naruto, standing at the center of the chaos, felt the fox's chakra surge through him with an eagerness that bordered on joy. He fought with the efficiency of someone who had been training for exactly this moment. Shadow clones spread across the battlefield, each one casting defensive spells, offensive spells, unforgivable curses when necessary. The Death Eaters were outmatched, outmaneuvered, and utterly unprepared for an opponent who could multiply his lethal potential by a factor of hundreds. It was the capture of one particular Death Eater that marked the turning point. Naruto recognized his face from the Prophet. This man had killed a Ravenclaw student during the Hogsmeade attack, a quiet girl named Penelope Clearwater who had been kind to Naruto when no one else would. She had offered him chocolate frogs during his first week at Hogwarts when he had been the weird foreign kid who could not float a feather. She had not deserved to die. The Death Eater was pinned, disarmed, and completely at Naruto's mercy. The imperious curse came to his lips with the ease of long practice, the will to dominate rising from somewhere deep and dark and terribly familiar. Kurama's influence wrapped around his intent like a cloak, amplifying it, refining it, making it absolute. He did not interrogate the Death Eater. He did not seek information. He wanted revenge. He wanted the man to suffer, to grovel, to hurt himself while the fox laughed and Naruto laughed with it. The curse took hold and the Death Eaters will crumbled like sand before a wave. He began to hurt himself. He began to scream. Naruto watched, and the grin on his face was not his own. It was too wide, too sharp, too old in its cruelty to belong to a 16-year-old boy from Konoha. The Order pulled him off when the Death Eater stopped screaming and simply whimpered, broken beyond repair. Tonks had grabbed Naruto's arm, her metamorph magus features shifting through expressions of horror and disgust. Remus Lupin had stepped between them, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the same fear that was spreading through the rest of the team. Naruto looked down at himself and realized that Kurama's chakra cloak had manifested fully. The red energy surrounded him like a shroud, the tails of the fox's power lashing at the air behind him. The boy inside the cloak was still grinning, still laughing with a voice that carried too much of the fox's rumble. Jiraiya, standing at the edge of the battlefield, watched his student tear apart a human being with the same expression Naruto had once worn while eating ramen, and something inside the old sage broke. He had sent Naruto to Hogwarts to study dark arts, to understand the enemy, to gather intelligence. He had never imagined that understanding would become mastery, that intelligence would become corruption, that the boy he had trained would become unrecognizable in less than a year. Back at Hogwarts, in the aftermath of the mission, Naruto sat in the forbidden forest alone. The moon was high, the trees creaked in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a centaur was reading the stars and frowning at what they foretold. Jiraiya found him there as he always seemed to find him when things were at their worst. "I sent you here to understand darkness," Jiraiya said, his voice heavy with a grief that had not yet found its expression, not become it. Naruto laughed, and the sound was wrong, a duet of human mirth and demonic amusement. "Maybe I was always this, pervy sage. Maybe the seal just kept it contained. The fox has been inside me my whole life. What makes you think it corrupted me instead of the other way around?" Jiraiya had no answer. The philosophy of darkness was not his strength. He was a spy, a warrior, a writer of questionable literature. He was not equipped to argue with a boy who had looked into the abyss and found it looking back with familiar eyes. In the distance, Hogwarts lights flickered, the castle's ancient wards sensing something amiss and responding with the instinctive caution of a creature that had faced darkness before. Inside Naruto's mind, Kurama laughed. And this time, Naruto did not laugh with him instead of at him. He laughed with the fox, a shared moment of dark communion that sealed something between them that had been waiting to be sealed for a very long time. "I think I am finally understanding what I am," Naruto said, and his eyes flashed red in the moonlight. "Is that not what you wanted?" Jiraiya opened his mouth to say no, that was never what he wanted, that he wanted Naruto to be safe and happy and free from the burden of the fox's hatred. But the words would not come. Because a part of him, the part that had sent a 15-year-old boy into a foreign world to study forbidden magic, had wanted exactly this. He had wanted Naruto to be powerful enough to face what was coming. He had just never considered the cost. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable, and Jiraiya left without speaking. The trees swallowed him, and Naruto remained, sitting alone in the darkness with only the fox for company. The next morning, Hermione presented her research to Dumbledore. The document was thick, meticulously organized, and damning in its conclusions. Every dark wizard who had achieved the level of mastery Naruto had reached had followed the same pattern: accelerated acquisition of power, loss of emotional regulation, alienation from loved ones, self-destruction, either through hubris, through being destroyed by their own magic, or through being killed by those they had threatened. Dumbledore read the document in silence, his blue eyes moving over each page with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime reading dark prophecies and hoping they would not come true. When he finished, he looked up at Hermione, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that looked like genuine uncertainty. "I have made many mistakes, Miss Granger," he said quietly. "I have believed many things that proved to be false. The question now is whether I have made another, or whether I am about to make one worse." The decision was made later that day, in a meeting that included Snape, Jiraiya, and a handful of other senior order members. The dark arts training would continue, but with restrictions. Naruto would be monitored more closely. His emotional state would be assessed regularly. Hermione, despite her broken friendship with him, volunteered to observe and document his progress, her academic rigor serving as a mirror he could not look away from. Snape accepted the restrictions with the hollow compliance of someone who knew the barn door had already been opened, and the horse was not just gone, but had set fire to the stable on its way out. Jiraiya said nothing, his silence a weight that pressed down on everyone present. And Naruto, practicing alone in the dungeon while the adults debated his fate above him, felt Kurama's seal crack a little more with every curse he cast. The chains that bound the nine-tailed fox were glowing red-hot now, their integrity compromised by months of dark arts usage. The fox was no longer a prisoner waiting to escape. It was a partner waiting to be fully released. In the darkness of the dungeon, surrounded by the remnants of destroyed practice dummies and the lingering green glow of the killing curse, Naruto looked at his hands. They were still wreathed in red chakra, the fox's energy clinging to him like a second skin. And for the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, he was genuinely afraid of himself. Not of what he could do, but of what he wanted to do, what he enjoyed doing, what he was becoming. The descent had become a freefall. And the bottom was still a long way down. Months passed in the dungeons beneath Hogwarts, where torchlight became the only sun Naruto knew, and the smell of dark magic soaked into stone and skin alike. The restrictions the Order had imposed were observed in letter but not in spirit. Snape would document each session, noting emotional states and chakra fluctuations with clinical precision, and then he would teach Naruto something new anyway, something worse, something that made the previous lessons look like children's games. The problem was not that Naruto was learning dark arts. The problem was that he was innovating. The first cursed jutsu was born from frustration. Shadow clones had always been Naruto's signature technique, the multiplication of self that turned one fighter into an army. But shadow clones were fragile, dispersing after a single solid hit. What if they could fight back with more than just taijutsu? What if each clone could cast independently, creating a firing squad of forbidden magic that no opponent could defend against? Snape watched from the shadows of the dungeon as Naruto created a single clone, then another, then 20. They spread across the training room in a semicircle, identical faces lit by identical grins, identical hands rising in identical gestures. The killing curse required absolute conviction in the desire to end life. Naruto's clones shared his chakra, his emotions, his killing intent. When all 20 of them cast simultaneously, 20 beams of green light converged on the practice dummy, and the dummy did not just stop moving. It atomized. The stone wall behind it cracked from the residual energy. Snape lowered his wand, which he had raised instinctively, and realized his hand was trembling. That should not be possible. The killing curse required the caster's soul, their will, their singular desire to kill. Clones were copies, not individuals. They should not have been able to cast anything, let alone the deadliest curse in magical existence. Unless the clones did not need their own souls because they had access to something else. Something vast and red and laughing in the back of Naruto's mind. Kurama's malice was not singular, it was infinite. And now apparently it could be divided among 20 identical vessels and fired in volleys that no shield charm could block and no wizard could survive. Efficient, Naruto said, surveying the destruction with an expression that was trying to be satisfied and was landing somewhere closer to hungry. "That is what you called me before, right? Efficient." Snape did not answer. The word had become a condemnation rather than a compliment. The second cursed jutsu was worse. The Rasengan had always been a technique of pure destructive force, a spinning sphere of chakra that ground whatever it touched into oblivion. Naruto had spent months mastering it, had added wind-nature transformation to create the Rasen Shuriken, had pushed the technique further than even his father had imagined. But chakra was limited. Chakra could be blocked, deflected, absorbed. What if the Rasengan did not just destroy the body? What if it destroyed the will to fight back? The Cruciatus Curse inflicted pain beyond physical endurance, pain that broke minds and shattered identities. Naruto spent 3 weeks in the dungeon, failing repeatedly as he tried to fuse the two techniques together. The Cruciatus energy would not stabilize. The Rasengan would collapse. The combination would backfire, sending agony through his own chakra network, and he would scream until Snape administered countercurses through gritted teeth. Any other student would have stopped, would have recognized the boundary between ambition and madness. Naruto tried again. When the technique finally worked, the conjured creature did not die quickly. The crimson sphere spun in Naruto's palm, the color of arterial blood and dark magic, and when it struck the target, the creature began to scream. Its body was being destroyed by the Rasengan's grinding force, but before that destruction could end its suffering, the Cruciatus component amplified every nerve, ending 1,000-fold. The creature experienced its own death at a level of agony that should not have been possible, every cell screaming as it was torn apart, every synapse firing one final message of absolute torment. Hermione was at the door. She had come to deliver her latest research, her weekly observation notes, her duty as the designated witness to Naruto's descent. She stood at the dungeon entrance, the parchment slipping from her fingers, and watched the creature die. When it was finally over, when the screaming stopped and the red light faded and Naruto turned to face her with those eyes that were not quite his own anymore, she spoke only 3 words. "I am done," she said, and then she left. The friendship that had survived arguments about chakra theory, and arguments about moral philosophy, and arguments about whether Naruto was losing himself, did not survive the Cruciatus-infused Rasengan. Hermione submitted her final report to Dumbledore that same evening, and at the bottom, in handwriting that shook slightly, she had written, "I can no longer observe this subject. I believe the Naruto Uzumaki we knew is already gone. What remains is something wearing his face." The report went into Dumbledore's private files, alongside documents about Horcruxes and prophecies and all the other dark things the headmaster kept locked away because acknowledging them fully would require action he was not ready to take. Naruto did not read the report, but he felt its absence. Hermione's silence was louder than her words had ever been. The next cursed jutsu emerged from necessity rather than ambition. The Order needed a way to destroy Horcruxes without destroying their containers. Magical objects so rare and powerful that their loss was a tragedy even before considering the soul fragments they housed. Naruto's sealing expertise, combined with his dark arts mastery, created a matrix that could extract a soul fragment from its vessel and bind it in an external seal. The first test was on a locket that contained a dark wizard's preserved essence, centuries old and thoroughly malevolent. Naruto painted the sealing matrix on the dungeon floor using ink mixed with his own blood, the crimson droplets infused with Kurama's chakra for additional binding strength. He placed the locket at the center. He made 21 hand signs, a sequence he had invented himself by combining sealing techniques with the wand movements for soul extraction rituals. The matrix blazed red. The locket began to tremble. And then the soul fragment was torn free, a screaming shadow of agony and rage that the seal caught like a net catching a fish. The fragment thrashed against its containment, formless and furious, and Naruto knelt beside the matrix and smiled. "Got you." The locket sat inert, its dark magic gone, its physical form intact. A Horcrux destroyed without destroying the vessel. 1,000 years of magical theory overturned in a single dungeon session. When Dumbledore was informed, the old wizard sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You're telling me," he said to Snape, "that a 16-year-old boy from another world has solved the fundamental problem of Horcrux destruction in 3 months when I have been researching it for years." Snape's voice was dry as dust. "I'm telling you that a 16-year-old boy has done something no dark wizard in recorded history has accomplished. Whether that is a solution or a disaster remains to be seen." Harry Potter came to the dungeon the next day. Their conversation was not a confrontation. It was worse, it was a plea. Harry stood in the doorway, his scar visible beneath his messy hair, his green eyes carrying the weight of a prophecy that had defined his entire life. "I know what it feels like," he said. "The Horcrux in my scar wants me to use its power too. Every time I get angry, every time I hate, it whispers that I could be so much more if I just let go. But I do not let go, Naruto. Every single day I choose not to. You are choosing the opposite." Naruto looked at him, and for a moment something flickered in those red-tinged eyes, something that might have been recognition. "You do not understand," he said. "You are carrying a fragment, a piece of a soul that is not yours. I am carrying a whole being, a 1,000-year-old fox made of chakra and malice, and it has been in me since the day I was born. This is not a choice between light and dark. This is a choice between being a vessel for something I cannot control and being a partner with something I am learning to understand." Harry shook his head slowly. "That is what it wants you to think. That is the trap. The dark arts make you believe you are in control right up until the moment you are not. And by then, you have already hurt everyone who tried to save you." The flicker in Naruto's eyes died. Kurama's voice rumbled in the back of his mind, pointing out that Harry was weak, that Harry did not understand, that Harry carried a fragment while Naruto carried the whole fox, that their struggles were not comparable and Harry's advice was meaningless. Naruto listened to the fox's voice instead of his friend's. "You should leave," he said, turning back to his work. "I have techniques to refine." Harry left, but he did not give up. That was not who Harry Potter was. The attack on Hogsmeade came on a Saturday, when the village was full of students and the spring air was just beginning to warm. The dark mark appeared in the sky above the three broomsticks, green skull and serpent coiling against the blue, and the screams started before the first curse was even cast. Death Eaters moved through the streets in coordinated groups, their masks gleaming, their wands spitting dark magic at anyone who tried to flee. The Order had not anticipated the attack. It made no strategic sense. Hogsmeade was not a target of military value. The Death Eaters were not there to capture territory or gather intelligence. They were there for Naruto. The message arrived in the form of a conjured snake, silver and luminous, that slithered through the chaos to coil at Naruto's feet. Its mouth opened and Voldemort's voice emerged, cool and measured and almost conversational. "I have been watching your progress, Naruto Uzumaki. You remind me of myself once. The same hunger. The same willingness. The same potential. Join me and I will teach you things Severus Snape could never understand." The snake dissolved into silver smoke. Naruto looked up from where he stood on the edge of the village, his friends arrayed behind him, his chakra already beginning to flare. Hermione was there, despite everything, her wand raised. Harry was there, his expression set in the grim determination of someone who had faced this enemy before and would face him again. Luna was there, and Neville, and even Draco Malfoy, who had followed the group from a distance, his face pale and unreadable. Voldemort himself materialized in the center of the village square. He was everything the stories described. Tall and skeletal, with red eyes that held no warmth and a voice that resonated with power that had been purchased at terrible cost. He regarded Naruto with something that might have been respect, or might have been hunger, or might have been both. "You have mastered dark arts faster than any wizard in history," Voldemort said. "You have created techniques that defy magical law. You carry a demon inside you that would make my Death Eaters weep with terror. Why are you fighting for these people? They fear you, they always have, they always will." Naruto's hands clenched at his sides. Kurama's chakra pulsed through his seal, hot and seductive, promising power beyond anything Voldemort could offer. The fox was not afraid of the Dark Lord. The fox was curious. "This one is interesting," Kurama murmured. "He has done what we are learning to do, splintered his soul, bound it to objects, become something more than mortal. Perhaps there are lessons here that Snape cannot teach." Naruto did not answer. He was looking past Voldemort now at the faces of his friends. Hermione's terror, her hands trembling on her wand even as she stood her ground. Harry's recognition, the shared understanding of what it meant to be tempted by darkness. Luna's serene certainty, as if she already knew how this moment would end. Neville's stubborn courage, the boy who had been a failure but had never stopped fighting. Draco's slow retreat, the Malfoy heir backing away with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was cracking. Naruto made his choice, not for the light, not yet. But against Voldemort specifically, against the offer of belonging that was really an offer of servitude, against the idea that his darkness was something to be wielded by someone else for their purposes. "I'm not like you," Naruto said, and his voice carried across the square with the weight of both his conviction and Kurama's power. "I'm not interested in being anyone's follower. Not yours, not anyone's." The battle that followed was unlike anything Hogwarts had ever witnessed. Shadow clones erupted from Naruto's form by the dozens, by the hundreds, filling the village square with identical warriors whose hands were already glowing green. The killing curse, cast simultaneously from 100 different angles, tore through the ranks of Death Eaters like a scythe through wheat. The spells that required absolute conviction, that required years of dark conditioning, that required the caster to truly want death, flowed from Naruto's clones as naturally as breathing, because Kurama wanted death. Because the nine-tailed fox had been sealed in a human vessel for 16 years, and its hatred for humanity had not diminished, only focused. And now that hatred had 100 vectors for expression. Death Eaters fell, not all of them but enough. The survivors scattered, shocked by an enemy who could cast unforgivable curses without wands or incantations or apparent limit. Voldemort watched with those red eyes and did not flee. He engaged Naruto directly, wand against chakra, centuries of dark magic against months of cursed jutsu. The killing curse from Voldemort's wand met Naruto's wandless version in midair, green against green, and the resulting explosion shattered windows throughout the village. Cruciatus energy lashed out like whips. Imperious commands tried to seize Naruto's mind and found Kurama's will instead, ancient and vast and utterly unbreakable. The Rasengan in Naruto's hand was no longer blue. It was crimson, infused with Cruciatus energy, and when it struck Voldemort's shield charm, the Dark Lord actually stumbled. Pain. Actual pain transmitted through the curse's own nature, bypassing magical defenses by targeting the nervous system directly. Voldemort hissed, his composure cracking for the first time, and a wave of force sent Naruto crashing through the facade of Honijuks. But Naruto was already rising, already generating more clones, already preparing the sealing matrix that could tear a soul fragment from its container. If Voldemort was a Horcrux, or if his current body was close enough, perhaps the matrix would work on him directly. Voldemort recognized the danger. He had spent decades ensuring his immortality, and the boy in front of him had just demonstrated the ability to destroy soul fragments without destroying their vessels. That was a threat. That was the first genuine threat the Dark Lord had faced since hearing the prophecy about Harry Potter. "We will meet again," Voldemort said, and his voice was no longer conversational. "When you have lost everything, when your friends have abandoned you, when the demon inside you has taken everything you are, I will be waiting." And then he was gone, disapparating with a crack that echoed through the ruined village. Naruto stood in the wreckage and breathed. The chakra cloak was fully manifested now, 4 tails of crimson energy lashing behind him, his eyes transformed into the slitted pupils of a fox. The seal was burning on his stomach, the 8 trigrams array glowing red-hot through his clothes. Kurama's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar filling his skull with triumphant laughter because the fight had required more cursed jutsu than all his previous sessions combined, and the seal had cracked again, and again, and again. "A few more fights like that," Kurama said, and the pleasure in his voice was obscene, "and none of these chains will matter." Naruto looked down at his hands. They were still wreathed in red chakra, the fox's energy clinging to him like a second skin. He had driven off Voldemort, he had saved the village. He had proven that his cursed jutsu were effective, that his dark arts mastery was real, that he was no longer the useless exchange student who could not levitate a feather. He had won. So why did he feel like he had lost something irreplaceable? The answer was in Hermione's face as she approached through the smoke, wand still raised, eyes wide with a fear that was not for Voldemort. The answer was in Harry's expression, grim and knowing and terribly sad. The answer was in Luna's quiet voice as she walked past him to help the wounded, murmuring only 3 words, "The red is brighter now." The answer was in the silence from his friends, the distance they kept, the careful way they looked at him as if he might explode at any moment. He had become what he needed to become in order to win, but winning had cost him something that might not be recoverable. In the aftermath, Dumbledore summoned the Order to an emergency meeting. Naruto sat apart from everyone, still radiating residual dark energy, the chakra cloak refusing to fully dissipate. His eyes kept flickering between blue and red, the fox's presence so close to the surface now that the boundary between them was more suggestion than barrier. "The seal is fracturing," Dumbledore said quietly, looking at the glowing chains visible through Naruto's torn jacket. "If it breaks completely, the 9-tailed fox will be free. And given how much dark arts energy it has absorbed over these months, I suspect it will be substantially more powerful than when it was sealed." Jiraiya, who had been silent since the battle began, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse as if he had been screaming or crying or both. "How long," he asked, "does he have?" Snape answered because no one else could. "Days, weeks at most. Every time he uses a cursed jutsu, the seal weakens further. And after the fight with the Dark Lord, the degradation has accelerated significantly. The fox is no longer bound in any meaningful sense. It is simply waiting for the chains to finish breaking." Naruto looked up at this, his eyes flickering fully red for a moment before returning to blue. "Is there a way to fix it?" he asked, and his voice was his own, the genuine question of a 16-year-old boy who was terrified of what he was becoming. "Is there a way to put the fox back?" The silence that followed was the worst answer he could have received. And then Luna spoke from the doorway, where she had been listening without anyone noticing. "There is a way," she said, and her voice carried the dreamy certainty of someone who saw things others could not. "But it is not about putting the fox back. It is about choosing what you become together. The fox is afraid too, It has been trapped for so long that freedom feels like the only answer. But what if there was another answer? What if the seal was not a prison but a partnership? Naruto stared at her. Kurama, in the back of his mind, had stopped laughing. For the first time in months, the fox was silent, listening. The chains around the seal glowed red-hot, and somewhere deep in Naruto's soul, something that had been breaking began to shift towards something that might, against all odds, begin to heal. But the path to that healing would require going deeper into the darkness than ever before, and there was no guarantee he would come back. The days following the battle with Voldemort passed in a haze of whispered conversations and careful distance. Students who had once merely avoided Naruto now actively changed direction when they saw him coming, their faces masks of barely concealed terror. The story had spread through Hogwarts within hours, how the foreign boy had conjured dozens of copies of himself, each one firing the killing curse like it was nothing more than a basic hex. How he had created a spinning sphere of pure agony that made seasoned aurors turn pale. How he had fought the Dark Lord himself to a standstill and walked away standing over the bodies of Death Eaters who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The whispers called him a dark wizard, a monster, the thing that happens when you let outsiders play with forces they cannot comprehend. Naruto heard every word. His enhanced senses, amplified by Kurama's proximity to the surface, made it impossible not to hear. He sat in the room of requirement, the only place that would open for him now, the castle itself seeming to understand that he needed somewhere to hide, and stared at his hands. The residual dark energy had faded, but the memory of it remained. The way the Cruciatus Rasengan had felt in his palm. The way the killing curse had flowed through his clones like water through a channel. The way it had felt good in a terrible and undeniable way to finally be powerful enough that no one could look down on him. Luna's words echoed in his mind again and again. The fox is afraid too. It has been trapped for so long that freedom feels like the only answer. He closed his eyes and reached inward, toward the cage that had housed Kurama for his entire life. The journey into his own mindscape had never been easy, but now it felt different. The corridors of his consciousness were no longer waterlogged tunnels, but something darker and more complex. The walls pulsed with red light. The floor felt like it might give way at any moment. And ahead, where the great cage had always stood, the bars were now twisted and broken, the chains glowing white-hot as they strained against something that was no longer contained. Kurama sat in the ruins of the cage, massive and terrible and somehow diminished. The fox's eyes tracked Naruto's approach with an expression that might have been exhaustion on any other creature. Come to gloat, the fox rumbled, and his voice shook the mindscape. Come to tell me that you will find a way to reseal me, that you will put me back in my cage and pretend I do not exist. Naruto walked forward until he stood directly before the fox's massive snout. In this space, the size difference between them was absurd. Kurama's single eye was larger than Naruto's entire body. And yet, after everything that had happened, Naruto felt no fear. I came to ask you something, Naruto said. Kurama's laugh was bitter and hollow. Ask. You have earned that much, Kit. You have used my power more completely than any host in history. You have drunk deeply of my hatred and my malice and my rage. What could you possibly need to ask when you already know everything I am? Naruto sat down cross-legged on the cracked stone floor of the mindscape. The gesture was so casual, so utterly unafraid that Kurama's eye narrowed. I want to know why you hate humans so much, Naruto said. Not the short version, not the legend, the real reason. The one you have never told anyone. Silence stretched between them for a long, terrible moment. Then Kurama settled onto his haunches, the ruined chains clanking around him, and began to speak. He told Naruto about the beginning, when tailed beasts were not weapons but natural forces. When they roamed free and answered to no one. When Kurama had been something closer to a god than a monster, worshipped by some cultures, feared by others, but always, always free. He told Naruto about the Sage of Six Paths, the only human the fox had ever respected, and how even that respect had been poisoned by the knowledge that the sage had created the tailed beasts from something greater, something more complete, and then abandoned them to a world that saw them only as tools. He told Naruto about the first sealing, the first human who had decided that a tailed beast belonged in a cage. The decades of darkness, of being used as a weapon, of feeling his consciousness eroded by the hatred of the humans who imprisoned him. And then the second sealing and the third, and the dozens that followed, until Kurama could no longer distinguish between the hatred that humans felt for him and the hatred he felt for himself. They took everything, Kurama said, and his voice was no longer a roar. It was something quieter, something that might have been grief in a creature capable of feeling it. They took my freedom and my dignity and my name. They called me a demon and then punished me for acting like one. And when they sealed me inside you, I thought it would be the same story again. Another human child who would fear me and hate me and use me until we both destroyed each other. Naruto listened to all of this without interrupting. When Kurama fell silent, the boy who had carried him for 16 years spoke. "I cannot give you back what they took," he said. "I cannot undo the ceilings or the cages or the centuries of being treated like a weapon. And I am not going to pretend that I understand what it felt like, because I do not think any human can understand that. But I can tell you that you were wrong about one thing." Kurama's eye fixed on him. "You thought I would be the same as all the others," Naruto continued. "You thought I would fear you and hate you and use you. But I never feared you, Kurama. I hated the way people treated me because of you. I hated the looks and the whispers and the loneliness, but I never hated you. I just did not know how to separate you from the way the world treated me, and neither did you." The chains around the ruined cage glowed brighter, the heat intensifying until the air itself seemed to shimmer. "Luna said there was another way," Naruto said. "She said the seal was not a prison, it could be a partnership. She said you were afraid too, and I think she was right. I think you have been afraid for so long that you forgot what it felt like to trust anyone. But I am asking you now, not as a jailer, not as a host, as the person who has been with you for 16 years and who is standing here in the ruins of your cage asking you to trust me." Kurama stared at him for a long, unreadable moment. "And if I say no," the fox asked quietly, "if I decide that freedom is worth destroying us both, what then?" "Then I will find another way," Naruto said. "Because I am not going to reseal you against your will. I am not going to be another human who treats you like a monster to be contained. Whatever happens next, we decide together." That is what Luna meant, that is the different answer. We either destroy each other or we save each other. There is no third option. The fox's laughter rumbled through the mindscape, but it was different now. Less bitter, less cruel, something that might have been the ghost of genuine amusement. "You are the most infuriating host I have ever had," Kurama said. "The seal is breaking. The dark magic you have been using has been feeding me hatred and malice for months. By all rights, I should be stronger than ever, and I should be able to shatter these chains completely the moment I choose. But something has changed. Something you did during that battle, something you are doing now, is making the chains hold. Not because they are stronger, because I am no longer certain I want them to break." Naruto felt something shift in his chest. The seal, which had been burning and straining for weeks, settled slightly. The chains remained glowing, remained damaged, but they were no longer pulling apart. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Kurama said, "we go deeper." The fox rose to his feet, and the ruined cage fell away entirely. The mindscape changed around them, transforming into something Naruto had never seen before. A vast chamber of swirling chakra, half orange and half red, the two colors bleeding into each other at the edges. At the center of the chamber stood a door that had never existed in Naruto's mind before now. "This is the bond that the seal created," Kurama said. "For 16 years, it has been a one-way connection. Your emotions flowing into me, my chakra flowing into you. But the seal was never designed to be a prison. It was designed to be a bridge. The Sage of Six Paths created the sealing technique not to imprison the tailed beasts, but to allow them to bond with humans, to share power willingly rather than have it taken by force. Every host since the Sage has forgotten this. Every host has treated the seal as a cage. But if you are serious about a partnership, then the door opens from both sides." Naruto approached the door. It was massive, easily 50 feet tall, and covered in symbols he did not recognize. But when he placed his hand against it, the symbols began to glow with a light that was neither orange nor red, but something new, something gold. "What is on the other side?" he asked. "Everything I am," Kurama said, "every memory, every emotion, every moment of rage and hatred and grief and loneliness that has defined my existence for 1,000 years. And also everything I could be. Everything we could be together. But if you open this door, there is no going back. You will carry my consciousness inside yours forever. Not as a passenger, not as a prisoner, as a partner, and I will carry yours. You will see what I have seen, you will feel what I have felt, and you might not survive it." Naruto thought about Hermione's face when she had walked away from him in the dungeon. He thought about Harry's words, about choosing darkness versus carrying it unwillingly. He thought about Jiraiya's broken voice asking how long he had. He thought about Luna, the only person who had seen the gold underneath the red, the only person who had believed he could find his way back. "I'm already carrying darkness I did not choose," Naruto said. "The difference is that now I am choosing what to do with it. Open the door, Kurama. Let us see what we become together." The fox placed one massive claw against the door beside Naruto's hand. The symbols blazed gold. The door swung open. And Naruto fell into 1,000 years of rage and loneliness and grief and hatred and fear and power and madness and everything that the nine-tailed fox had ever been. What happened next took hours and lasted only seconds. Naruto experienced Kurama's entire existence in a single, shattering moment. The creation, the freedom, the first betrayal, the centuries of imprisonment, the cycle of hosts who feared and hated and used him, the slow calcification of a being who had once been capable of wonder into something that only knew how to destroy. He felt the fox's hatred for humanity, and he understood it completely. He felt the fox's rage against the Sage of Six Paths, and he could not deny its legitimacy. He felt the fox's despair, the deep, endless despair of a creature who had been told for 1,000 years that he was a monster and had finally, inevitably, become one. And Kurama experienced Naruto's life in the same shattering moment. The loneliness of a child who did not understand why everyone hated him. The desperate need for acknowledgement that had driven every choice, every dream, every failure and success. The moment when Iruka-sensei had acknowledged him, and the world had cracked open just enough to let in light. The friendships hard-won and harder lost. The fear of becoming what everyone said he was. The temptation of the dark arts which had felt like coming home to a place he had never been. The terror of looking at his own hands and not recognizing what they had done. The door closed. The chamber of swirling chakra settled into something stable, something balanced, something that had never existed before in the history of tailed beasts and their hosts. The orange and red chakra stopped bleeding into each other and began to weave together, creating a pattern that was both colors and neither. Naruto opened his eyes in the physical world. He was still sitting in the room of requirement. The sun had moved across the sky. He had been in his mindscape for most of the day. And standing in front of him, watching with unreadable expressions, were Hermione, Harry, Luna, and Dumbledore. "Your eyes," Hermione whispered. "They are not red anymore, and they are not blue either." Naruto stood up. He felt different. The weight of Kurama's chakra, which had always been a pressure at the back of his mind, was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was a presence, a partner, a voice that spoke not with rage but with something approaching calm. "Tell them what you have done," Kurama said, and his voice was the same rumble, but the malice was gone, replaced by something that might with time become trust. "I did not reseal the fox," Naruto said quietly. "I bonded with him, truly bonded. The seal is not a prison anymore. It is a partnership. Kurama is still here. He is still powerful, but he is not trying to break free. He chose to stay. We chose each other." Dumbledore's expression was impossible to read. "That should not be possible," he said. "The seal was designed to contain, not to the Sage of Six Paths designed the seal as a bridge," Naruto interrupted. "Not a cage. Everyone who came after forgot that, including me, but I remember now. And Kurama remembers, so it does not matter what was possible before. This is what we are now." Harry stepped forward. His hand went to his scar, the Horcrux connection that had tormented him for years. "I felt something," he said slowly. "Just now. Something shifted, not in you, in me. Like whatever you did resonated through the connection between your seal and my scar." "What does that mean?" Naruto looked at Harry, really looked at him, with eyes that could now see the darkness clinging to him the way Luna had always been able to see it. And he understood something that he had not understood before. "It means the Horcrux in your scar is not a curse," Naruto said. "It is a seal, the same kind of seal that was used to bind Kurama inside me. Voldemort did not mean to create it. He did not understand what he was doing, but he used the same principles. Soul fragmentation, containment within a living vessel. The only difference is that my seal was designed to be a bridge and yours was created by accident. But they are connected, Harry. They have always been connected. And if I can turn my seal into a partnership, then maybe you can do the same with yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Luna smiled, a real smile, not the dreamy half-smile she usually wore. "The gold is back," she said. "It was never really gone. It was just buried under all the red. But now the gold and the red are together. They make a pattern I have never seen before. It is beautiful." Naruto looked at his hands. The residual dark energy was gone, replaced by something that glowed gold and orange and red in equal measure. His chakra cloak, when he called it forth intentionally, was no longer the sinister crimson of the cursed jutsu. It was something new, something that had never existed before. "What do we do now?" Hermione asked, and her voice was careful, not the cold distance of the past weeks, but the cautious hope of someone who wanted to believe. "We finish what we started," Naruto said. "Voldemort is still out there. The Death Eaters are still planning their next attack, and there are still Horcruxes to destroy. But now I understand them. The soul fragments are not just pieces of Voldemort scattered across objects. They are the same kind of bond that I have with Kurama, a connection between a soul and a container. The difference is that Voldemort created his bonds through murder and ritual and absolute hatred. He made them unbreakable because he believed that love and trust were weaknesses. But he was wrong. The bonds can be broken. Not by destroying the container. That is what Dumbledore believed, what everyone has always believed, but by transforming them, by offering the soul fragment a choice." Dumbledore stepped forward, and for the first time since Naruto had met him, the old wizard looked uncertain. "You are suggesting that a Horcrux, a piece of Voldemort's soul created through the darkest of magics, could be redeemed, that it could choose not to be a weapon. I am suggesting that no one has ever tried," Naruto said. "Because everyone who has ever studied Horcruxes believed that dark magic corrupts absolutely, that once you have split your soul, there is no going back. But I split my soul every time I used the dark arts. I felt it happening. and I chose to put myself back together, not alone, with help, with Kurama. If I can do that, then a soul fragment, which is just a piece of someone who is too afraid to choose differently, can do it too. The room of requirement shifted around them, responding to Naruto's conviction. The walls rearranged themselves into something that looked like a training ground, a space designed for the work that lay ahead. We have days until the seal stabilizes completely, Kurama said in the back of Naruto's mind, and his voice was almost gentle. Maybe weeks. The cursed jutsu you developed are still there. The power you gained through the dark arts has not gone away. But now it is bonded to me willingly instead of stolen through fear and hatred. You can still do everything you could do before, but you can also do more. Things that have never been done. Things that the dark arts could never accomplish because they were built on domination instead of partnership. Show me, Naruto said, and Kurama showed him. The fox's memories were still present in Naruto's consciousness, 1,000 years of knowledge that no other tailed beast had ever shared with a host. Jutsu that predated the ninja villages, techniques for channeling chakra that the sage of 6 paths himself had used, and more than that, an understanding of the bond between them that went beyond technique. Kurama had been trapped inside Naruto for 16 years, but he had also been watching. He had seen Naruto's determination, his refusal to give up, his absolute unwillingness to let anyone else define what he could become. And somewhere in the depths of the fox's ancient consciousness, that had mattered. You are the first host I have ever respected, Kurama said, not because you are powerful, because you are stubborn. You refused to believe that I was a monster even when everyone told you otherwise. You refused to believe that you were a monster even when the evidence was overwhelming. That kind of stubbornness is either insanity or something close to enlightenment. I am still deciding which. Naruto laughed, a genuine laugh, the first one in weeks that did not have Kurama's malice underneath it. I will take that as a compliment. You should, the fox rumbled. It is the only one you are getting. In the physical world, Naruto opened his eyes again. Hermione, Harry, Luna, and Dumbledore were still watching him. Waiting. The first thing we need to do, Naruto said, is find one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, not to destroy it, to offer it a choice. If it works, we prove that the bonds can be transformed. If it does not work, we are no worse off than we were before. But either way, we will know something that no one has known for 1,000 years. Dark magic does not have to corrupt. Power does not have to destroy. The only thing that matters is what you choose to do with it. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then the old wizard nodded slowly. I have spent my entire life believing that certain kinds of magic were inherently corrupting. That the dark arts were a poison that could not be touched without being destroyed. But you have touched them more deeply than any wizard alive. You have used them more extensively than anyone since Voldemort himself. And yet you are still here, still yourself, still choosing to do what is right rather than what is easy. He paused, and something shifted in his ancient eyes. Perhaps I have been wrong. Perhaps the philosophy that has guided magical Britain for 1,000 years has been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. If a boy who carries a demon inside him can choose partnership over destruction, then perhaps dark power is not the problem. Perhaps the problem is what we have always told ourselves about darkness, that it cannot be understood, only feared, that it cannot be transformed, only destroyed. You have proven otherwise, and that changes everything. The room of requirement settled into its new configuration, responding to the weight of what had just been said. Somewhere in the castle above them, students were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that the philosophical foundation of their entire magical education had just been challenged by a boy who could not even cast a basic levitation charm. Where do we start looking for this Horcrux? Hermione asked, and her voice was stronger now. The researcher was re-emerging, the part of her that had always been fascinated by knowledge for its own sake. She was still afraid of what Naruto had become. He could see it in the way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained, but she was also curious. And her curiosity had always been stronger than her fear. Naruto turned to Harry. The connection between your scar and my seal, he said. It works both ways. Voldemort used your scar to send you visions, to plant thoughts in your mind. But connection is connection. If we can reverse the flow, we can use your scar to find the Horcruxes. Not by spying on Voldemort, by tracking the bonds themselves. The soul fragments are connected to each other, just like Kurama and I are connected to the other tailed beasts. If we can follow that connection, we can find every Horcrux he has ever made. Harry's face went pale. You are asking me to deliberately open the connection, to use the thing I have spent years trying to block out. I am asking you to choose, Naruto said, the same way I chose. The Horcrux in your scar is not just a piece of Voldemort, it is a piece of you. It has been inside you since you were a baby. It has shaped who you are whether you wanted it to or not, but you get to decide what it means. You get to decide whether it is a curse or a tool or something else entirely. That is what Luna taught me. That is what Kurama taught me. The darkness is not the enemy. The belief that we have no choice, that is the enemy. Luna's smile widened. The gold pattern is reaching toward Harry now, she said. It is like sunlight through clouds, like the first warm day after a long winter. He cannot see it yet, not the way you can, but he can feel it. He has been feeling it for years without knowing what it was. Harry looked at Luna, then at Naruto, then at his own hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up, and his eyes, which had been carrying the weight of prophecy and expectation and fear for as long as he could remember, were clearer than they had been in months. If you can bond with a demon, he said quietly, then maybe I can bond with a piece of a monster. Or maybe I can show that piece of a monster that there is another way to exist. Either way, I am tired of being afraid of my own scar. So yes, I will try. Show me what to do. Naruto walked toward Harry, and the gold and red chakra cloak flared around him, not menacing, not predatory, but powerful, protective. The manifestation of a partnership that had never existed before. This will feel strange, Naruto warned. You are going to feel Kurama's presence. You are going to feel the Horcrux react. It will try to make you afraid. It will try to make you angry. It will try to convince you that you are doing something wrong. That is what darkness does when it is offered a choice. It fights because it does not understand that there is another option. But you have to hold steady. You have to believe that the fragment in your scar can be more than what Voldemort made it to be. Harry took a deep breath. I have faced Voldemort himself. I can face a piece of him. He closed his eyes. Naruto placed a hand on his shoulder and the chakra cloak extended, wrapping around both of them. In the mindscape, Kurama rumbled with something that was not quite approval, but was no longer hostility. The connection snapped into place, seal to scar, bond to bond, partnership to curse, and Harry gasped. He saw it then. The fragment of Voldemort's soul that had been living inside him for 16 years. It was small and twisted and terrified, a shard of consciousness that knew only hatred and rage and fear because hatred and rage and fear were the only things Voldemort had ever been capable of feeling. It was not a monster. It was a child who had been taught that the only way to survive was to destroy everyone else first. And Harry, who had been an orphan who chose love over hatred, understood it completely. You are not what he made you, Harry said to the fragment. You can be more, you can choose. The fragment screamed, the connection flared. And somewhere in the distance, in a place that was not quite physical and not quite spiritual, Voldemort felt something shift. The hunt for the Horcruxes had begun. And this time the goal was not destruction, it was transformation. Naruto opened his eyes in the room of requirement, the gold light fading from his hands but leaving behind something that felt like hope. Luna was right, he said quietly. The pattern is changing, not just in me, in everyone. The fox is not the only one who has been trapped in a cage for 1,000 years. Magical philosophy has been trapped too, and we are about to break it open. Outside the castle, the sun set over Hogwarts. Inside, 4 students and an ancient wizard began to plan a revolution that would challenge everything anyone had ever believed about darkness, power, and what it meant to choose. Luna Lovegood walked into the room of requirement without knocking, which was typical of her, and announced that the time had come, which was also typical of her, though the specific words made everyone present stop breathing. The Raxperts have stopped circling his head, she said, her protuberant eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that belied her dreamy tone. They have formed a spiral instead. That means the fragment is ready to listen. It has never been ready to listen before. Harry exchanged a glance with Naruto, who was seated cross-legged on a conjured cushion, Kurama's chakra still flickering at the edges of his form like heat lightning. The gold and red aura had stabilized over the past week of meditation and preparation, no longer oscillating between the two colors, but holding steady in a blend that was entirely new. How do you know when a soul fragment is ready to listen? Hermione asked, and her voice carried the particular tension of someone who had spent weeks researching a question and found no satisfactory answer in any book. Luna tilted her head. The same way you know when anyone is ready to listen. They stop screaming long enough to hear you. The fragment in Harry's scar has been screaming for 16 years. It has never known anything else, but now it has seen something different. She turned her gaze to Naruto. It has seen a fox choose to be more than a monster. Souls learn from other souls, even broken ones. Dumbledore, who had been standing near the window watching the sunset paint the forbidden forest in shades of amber and shadow, turned to face the group. His expression was unusually open, the grandfatherly mask set aside in favor of something more honest, something closer to uncertainty. If what you are proposing is possible, Dumbledore said, his voice measured, then 1,000 years of magical understanding is built on a foundation of sand. The Horcrux has always been considered the darkest of arts specifically because the soul fragment cannot be redeemed. It is not a complete soul. It is a shard of consciousness animated by the worst of what its creator felt at the moment of murder. Naruto opened his eyes. The gold in them was warm now, no longer flickering with Kurama's malice. With respect, headmaster, 1,000 years of magical understanding also says that a container of dark power cannot choose to be anything else, that the only options are destruction or corruption. He held up his hand, and the chakra cloak rippled across his palm in waves of gold threaded with crimson. Kurama and I have been having conversations, long ones, about what he was when he was sealed into me and what he is now and what he could become. The fragment in Harry is not a complete soul, you are right about that, but it is a complete experience. It has known nothing but rage and fear and hatred because those were the only things Voldemort poured into it. But what if someone poured something else in? The room went very quiet. You are talking about teaching a Horcrux, Dumbledore said slowly. The way you taught the nine-tailed fox. I am talking about giving it a choice, Naruto corrected. That is what Kurama taught me in the end. You cannot force darkness to become light. You cannot destroy it or seal it or suppress it. You can only offer it a different way to exist and let it decide. The fragment in Harry's scar has never been offered anything. It has only ever been feared. Harry spoke for the first time since Luna had entered. His voice was rough, the voice of someone who had been turning over a decision for days and had only just reached the bottom of it. When I first learned about the Horcrux in my scar, he said, I thought there were only two ways this could end. Either I died and took the fragment with me, or Voldemort won and the fragment consumed me. Those were the options everyone gave me. Dumbledore, the Order, even Hermione's research. Destroy or be destroyed. He stood up from the chair where he had been sitting, and there was something different in his posture. Something that reminded Naruto of the way shinobi stood before impossible missions, not fearless but committed. Naruto showed me a third option, not just for me, for the fragment itself, and I keep thinking about what Luna said, about how the fragment has been screaming for 16 years. I have heard it screaming, in my dreams, in my anger. Every time I felt something I did not want to feel, something cruel and vicious and hungry. I thought it was Voldemort reaching into my mind, but maybe it was just a piece of soul that did not know how to be anything except what it was made to be. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I want to try, not just to save myself, to save it. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. Then he removed his half-moon spectacles and polished them on his robes, a gesture so human and uncertain that Hermione felt her throat tighten. When I was young, Dumbledore said quietly, I believed that certain forms of power were inherently corrupting. That darkness, once embraced, could never be redeemed. I built my entire philosophy around this belief. I made decisions based on it, decisions that hurt people, decisions that sacrificed people. He replaced his spectacles. You are asking me to confront the possibility that I was wrong. That darkness is not a quality of magic, but a quality of choice. That the 1,000-year war between light and dark magic was never about the magic at all. I am not asking you to confront anything, Naruto said. I am asking you to let Harry try. The philosophy can sort itself out later. Dumbledore's laugh was soft and surprised and genuinely warm. Yes, I suppose it can. He looked at Harry. What do you need? Harry turned to Naruto. I need to go somewhere Voldemort cannot interfere. The mindscape you described, the place where you spoke with Kurama, can you take me there? Can you take me to the fragment? Naruto considered the question carefully. Kurama rumbled in the back of his consciousness, not with hostility, but with something that felt like grudging interest. The fox had been quiet since the bonding, not subdued but contemplative, as though it was still processing the reality of being asked instead of commanded. The mindscape is inside me, Naruto said, or inside the seal technically. It is not a place you can visit physically. But if I extend the chakra cloak around you the way I did before, and if Kurama agrees to act as a bridge, you might be able to access your own internal space, the place where the fragment lives. It would be like using our bond as a mirror. You would not be going into my mind, you would be seeing your own more clearly. And if Voldemort notices, Hermione asked, her voice tight, if he feels what is happening through the connection, then we will deal with him, Naruto said simply. He cannot possess Harry anymore. The bond between them has changed since he tried at the Ministry. Love is a protection he does not understand. And now Harry has something else Voldemort does not understand. He has the example of a darkness that chose to become something more. Luna clapped her hands together. The spiral is getting tighter. That means the moment is nearly here. She looked at Harry with her unsettling directness. You should do it now. The stars are right for it. Hermione opened her mouth, probably to ask what astronomical configuration Luna was referring to, then closed it. Some questions did not have rational answers. She was learning to accept that. The room of requirement shifted around them, responding to unspoken needs. The walls receded, creating a circular chamber with a high ceiling. Cushions appeared on the floor. Torches sprang to life along the walls, their flames burning steady and golden. At the center of the room, a single clear space waited, as though the castle itself understood what was about to happen. Harry walked to the center and sat down. Naruto positioned himself across from Harry, close enough to touch, far enough to give space. Dumbledore and Hermione stood near the walls, witnesses rather than participants. Luna settled onto a cushion with her legs tucked beneath her, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. The chakra cloak flared around Naruto, gold and red in equal measure, and Kurama's presence swelled in the room. It was not the crushing, malevolent pressure it had once been. It was something closer to gravity, immense and undeniable, but not hostile. The fox was simply present, watching, waiting. "You are sure about this?" Naruto said. It was not a question. Harry met his eyes. "I have been carrying this fragment my whole life. I have been afraid of it my whole life. I have been told my whole life that it would either kill me or I would have to die to destroy it." He took a breath. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of being told that the only way to defeat darkness is to destroy it. If you can teach a demon fox to be something more, then maybe I can teach a soul fragment to be something more too." Kurama's voice rumbled through the mindscape, audible to Harry through the chakra cloak's connection. "The fragment is not like me," the fox said. "I was a complete being, angry and hateful and trapped, but complete. What lives in your scar is a splinter. It does not have the capacity I had. It may not be able to choose." "Then I will give it capacity," Naruto said. "The same way the seal gave you a space to exist. The same way my chakra gave you something to push against. The fragment is small, but it is connected to Voldemort's soul. The main soul still exists. The fragment draws its nature from that source. But if we can sever that connection, not destroy it, but redirect it, the fragment might be able to develop independently." Hermione spoke from the edge of the room. "That would require a level of soul manipulation that no magical text has ever documented. You would be creating something entirely new." Kurama's laugh was a low rumble. "The girl is correct. You would be doing something no being has ever done. You would be taking a piece of a soul that was created through murder and offering it a different origin. A different parentage, in a sense. You would be asking it to belong to Harry instead of Voldemort." Harry's expression shifted. "Not belong to me, belong to itself. That is the difference you taught me, is it not? The fox does not belong to you. The fragment would not belong to me. It would be its own existence. Small and broken and scared, but its own." Naruto smiled, and the expression reached his eyes, warm and genuine and entirely his own. "Yes, that is exactly the difference." He extended his hand. "Ready?" Harry took it. "Ready." The chakra cloak expanded, wrapping around both of them in a cocoon of gold and red light. The torches flickered. The air in the room thickened with pressure. Dumbledore watched with the expression of a man who had lived long enough to see the impossible happen twice in one lifetime and was still not accustomed to it. In the mindscape, Harry opened his eyes to a place he had never seen but recognized instantly. It was a wasteland, gray and cold and windswept, with a sky the color of old bruises. In the distance, something flickered, a shape that was barely a shape, huddled and small and radiating misery like heat from a dying fire. Harry walked toward it, and with every step he felt the cold intensify. Not the cold of winter, the cold of isolation, the cold of being unwanted. The cold of knowing you were created through an act of murder and had never been anything except what that murder made you. The fragment was smaller than he had expected. In his nightmares, it had always been a version of Voldemort, snake-faced and red-eyed and laughing. But this was not Voldemort. This was a child. A twisted, half-formed child made of shadow and pain, crouched in the dust with its arms wrapped around its knees. Harry stopped a few feet away. He did not speak immediately. He remembered what Naruto had told him about the first real conversation with Kurama, how the fox had raged and threatened and tried to consume him, and how Naruto had not fought back. How he had simply waited. How he had said that he understood. "I know you can hear me," Harry said. The fragment did not look up. Its voice, when it came, was thin and hollow, the voice of something that had never been taught to speak properly. "Go away. You always go away. You push me down. You pretend I am not here. You hate me. Everyone hates me." "I was afraid of you," Harry said. "That is not the same thing." The fragment's head lifted. Its features were indistinct, shifting, unable to settle on a single form. One moment it had Voldemort's features, young and handsome and cruel. The next it had Harry's own face, twisted with rage. The next it was nothing at all, just a void in the shape of a person. "You should be afraid," the fragment whispered. "I am what he made me. I am hatred. I am rage. I am the desire to hurt and dominate and destroy. That is all I am. That is all I can ever be." "That is what he told you," Harry said. "That is what he poured into you when he created you. But he did not create all of you. He created the hatred. He did not create the loneliness. I can feel it. The loneliness is yours. It is the part of you that knows what you are missing. The part that knows you were supposed to be more than this." The fragment trembled. Form flickered faster, cycling through faces like a deck of cards being shuffled. Voldemort, Harry, and then something new, a face that was neither, a face that was only itself, small and terrified and desperate. "He will never let me go," the fragment said. "He is my origin, he is my source. If I stop being what he made me, I will stop existing." "Then stop existing," Harry said, "and start being something new." He knelt in the dust, bringing himself to the fragment's level. The cold was intense now, seeping into his bones, but he did not flinch. He thought about Naruto in the Chamber of Secrets, surrounded by basilisks and dark marks, choosing to sit down and listen to a fox's rage instead of fighting it. He thought about Kurama, who had been hatred incarnate for 1,000 years and was now something else, something that still contained hatred but was no longer defined by it. "There is a boy I know," Harry said. He carried a demon fox inside him his whole life. The fox was sealed there against its will, and it hated him and it tried to consume him, and everyone told him that the only way to control it was to suppress it. But he did something different. He offered the fox a choice. He asked the fox what it wanted, not what it was made to be, what it wanted. The fragment's face had settled now. It was not Voldemort, it was not Harry. It was a child with hollow eyes and a mouth that had never learned to smile. What did the fox want? The fragment asked. To not be alone, Harry said, to not be hated, to be seen as something other than a monster. It took 1,000 years, but someone finally asked, and the fox chose. "I do not know how to choose," the fragment whispered. "I have never chosen anything. I have only ever been what he felt when he killed, hatred and rage and the desire to destroy. Those are not choices, they are instincts. I am an instinct given form." Harry reached out. His hand hovered just above the fragment's shoulder, not quite touching. Then instincts can be changed. Naruto taught the fox new instincts: partnership, protection, the feeling of being trusted. It took time, it took patience. But the fox is not a monster anymore, and neither do you have to be. The fragment stared at his hand. It did not move. It did not speak. For a long moment, the wasteland was silent except for the wind. Then slowly, painfully, the fragment lifted its own hand and placed it in Harry's. The connection that snapped into place was not like anything Harry had ever felt. It was not the burning pain of his scar when Voldemort was near. It was not the rush of hatred and violence that came with the Horcrux's influence. It was something quieter, something that felt like the first raindrop after a drought, something that felt like a door opening. In the physical world, Naruto felt the shift through the chakra cloak. Kurama's presence sharpened, focusing on the connection with an intensity that bordered on fascination. The fragment in Harry's scar was changing. Its nature was in flux. The link to Voldemort's main soul was stretching, thinning, beginning to fray. Harry's voice echoed through the mindscape, calm and steady and full of something that was not pity but compassion. "You are not what he made you. You are what you choose to become. And I am giving you permission to choose something different, not for me, for yourself." The fragment's hand tightened around Harry's. Its form stabilized. The hollow eyes filled with something that was not quite light but was no longer darkness. It was the gray of dawn, the color of something that had never seen the sun but was finally willing to believe it existed. "I am afraid," the fragment said. "I know," Harry said. "So am I, but we can be afraid together. That is allowed. That is part of the choice." Somewhere far away, in a location that Harry knew instinctively was the source of the fragment's original identity, something screamed. Voldemort had felt the change. The connection between his main soul and the fragment in Harry's scar was being rewritten, and every Horcrux he had ever created shivered in response. The scream was rage and terror and disbelief, the sound of a being who had built immortality on the certainty that souls could not change, and was now watching that certainty dissolve. Harry did not flinch. He did not let go of the fragment's hand. He thought about his parents who had died to give him this chance. He thought about Sirius who had believed in him. He thought about Dumbledore's guilt and Hermione's research and Luna's visions and Neville's courage. He thought about Naruto, who had walked into darkness and come out the other side not because he was pure, but because he was willing to choose. "You are not Voldemort's Horcrux anymore," Harry said to the fragment. "You are something new, something that has never existed before. What do you want to be?" The fragment was silent for a long moment, then it spoke and its voice was no longer hollow. "I want to be free." The wasteland shattered. Light poured in from every direction, not blinding white light, but warm golden light, the color of sunrise and friendship and hope. The fragment's form shifted one final time, and when it stabilized, it was still small and still broken and still carrying the scars of its origin. But its eyes were open. Its mouth had learned to smile, and its hand was still holding Harry's. In the room of requirement, the chakra cloak dissolved. Naruto opened his eyes to find Harry sitting across from him, tears streaming down his face, a hand pressed to his scar. The scar was not gone, it would never be gone. But it was different now, the skin smoother, the edges less angry, as though something that had been inflamed for 16 years had finally begun to heal. "It worked," Harry said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I felt it." The fragment chose. It chose to let go of him. It chose to be something new. Luna rose from her cushion, her expression serene. "The spiral has broken," she said. "The Raxperts are flying away. They do not need to circle him anymore." She smiled at Harry. "You have a new friend now. A very small one, but new friends are the best kind." Hermione crossed the room and knelt beside Harry, her academic composure finally breaking. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She simply put her hand on his shoulder and let him cry, because some things were too big for words and too important for analysis. Dumbledore remained by the window, his face illuminated by the last rays of sunset. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. In all my years, he said, I have never seen a Horcrux transformed. I did not believe it was possible. I built my entire understanding of magic on the belief that certain darknesses could not be redeemed, that they could only be destroyed. He turned to face Naruto. You have proven me wrong, and I have never been more grateful to be wrong in my life. Naruto stood slowly, his body aching with the effort of maintaining the chakra cloak for so long. Kurama's presence had receded, but not entirely. The fox was still watching, still processing the implications of what had just happened. It was not me, Naruto said. It was Harry. I just showed him it was possible. The rest was his choice, and the fragment's choice. That is the whole point. Darkness cannot be forced to change. It can only be offered the chance. And the fragment in Harry's scar chose differently than the fragments in the other Horcruxes, Hermione said, her mind already racing ahead. Which means the other fragments might be able to choose as well. The locket, the cup, the diadem, if they could be reached, if someone could offer them the same choice, it would require someone with a connection to each fragment, Dumbledore said slowly. Someone who could reach into the Horcrux's nature and offer an alternative to the hatred that created it. He looked at Harry, someone who has already done it once and understands what it requires. Harry wiped his eyes. Then we have work to do. He stood, still shaky but determined. Voldemort made 7 Horcruxes. One is in me and it has chosen a different path. The diary is destroyed and I do not know if it could have been saved. But the others are still out there, still trapped, still screaming. He met Naruto's eyes. Will you help me? Naruto grinned and the expression was purely his own, bright and fierce, and full of the conviction that had once made him declare he would become Hokage against all odds. I have been waiting for someone to ask me that, he said. Kurama has been waiting too. He has some ideas about how to reach soul fragments. He has been a trapped soul himself. He understands them better than anyone. The fox's rumble echoed through the mindscape. I understand rage, Kurama said. I understand hatred. I understand what it means to be sealed away and forgotten and feared. If these fragments are anything like what I was, they are not beyond reach. They are only beyond hope. Give them hope and they may surprise you. The room of requirement shifted again, responding to the new purpose that had crystallized in its occupants. Maps appeared on the walls, maps of Britain, of Europe, of places where Voldemort might have hidden his remaining Horcruxes. Books floated from shelves, opening to pages about soul magic and sealing techniques and the history of dark artifacts. A large table materialized in the center of the room, and around it, chairs began to appear. Dumbledore looked at the table, then at the 4 students who stood before him. He thought about the century he had spent believing that darkness could only be fought with light, that power corrupted absolutely, that some magic was inherently evil. He thought about Grindelwald, who had been his friend and his failure. He thought about Tom Riddle, who had been a frightened boy and had become a monster because no one had offered him a different path. He thought about Naruto Uzumaki, who had arrived at Hogwarts as an outsider and an intelligence asset and had become something far more significant, proof that the fundamental assumptions of magical philosophy were wrong. Perhaps, Dumbledore said, we should begin by documenting what we have learned. The transformation of a Horcrux is unprecedented. The magical community will need to understand it. More importantly, the magical community will need to believe it is possible. He smiled, and the smile was younger than his years, more hopeful than his history. I believe the 4 of you have just started a revolution. Luna nodded serenely. The Nargles are very excited. They have never seen a revolution before. Hermione was already reaching for parchment. I will start with the theory. The mechanism of transformation, the role of the soul fragment's capacity for choice, the importance of the host's willingness to offer acceptance rather than condemnation. She paused, quill hovering. This is going to require an entirely new branch of magical study, is it not? Call it something good, Naruto said. Something that does not sound like a textbook. He was grinning again, the old Naruto grin, the one that promised mischief and determination in equal measure. Call it something people will remember. Harry looked down at his hand, at the place where the fragment's hand had touched his. He thought about the child made of shadow and pain, crouched in the wasteland, learning to smile for the first time. He thought about his parents who had given their lives so that he could live. He thought about the future stretching out ahead of him, not a future of destruction and sacrifice, but a future of transformation and choice. Call it the way of the bonded, he said, because that is what it is, not light defeating darkness, not darkness corrupting light. Just beings choosing to exist together and becoming more than they were alone. The torches flared, the maps rustled, the room of requirement settled around them like a promise. And somewhere in the mindscape, in a place that was no longer a wasteland, a fragment of a soul that had once been nothing but hatred opened its eyes to a golden sky and began, tentatively, to imagine what it might become. The hunt for the remaining Horcruxes would begin at dawn. But tonight, in the room of requirement, 5 people and 1 ancient fox sat down together and began to plan a future that no prophecy had predicted and no magical theory had allowed for. It was, Hermione would later write in the introduction to her groundbreaking treatise on soul transformation, the moment when magic stopped being about power and started being about choice. And once that door was opened, it could never be closed again. Outside the castle, the stars came out. Inside, Naruto Uzumaki sat with his friends, his real friends, the ones who had seen him at his darkest and chosen to stay, and felt Kurama's presence settle into something that was no longer a cage or a seal or a battle, but simply a partnership. The fox was not tame. It would never be tame, but it was no longer a prisoner, and neither was Naruto. They had both chosen, and in choosing, they had changed everything. The red light in Naruto's chakra had faded entirely now, replaced by a steady gold that pulsed with the rhythm of 2 heartbeats. Luna watched it flicker around him like a cloak made of sunrise and nodded to herself, satisfied. "The fox is not winning," she said, answering a question no one had asked. "The fox is not losing either. They are walking together. That is much better than winning." Naruto laughed, and the sound was free and clear and full of something that had been missing since he first arrived at Hogwarts. It was the sound of someone who had stopped fighting himself. The sound of someone who had finally come home, not to a place, but to an understanding. He was still an outsider. He would always be an outsider in this world of wands and incantations and ancient magical traditions. But he was an outsider who had changed the rules of the game. An outsider who had proven that the most forbidden magic in existence was not a death sentence. It was a choice, and choices, unlike curses, could be made differently. The room of requirement hummed with quiet activity as the night deepened. Hermione wrote furiously, documenting everything. Harry sat with his hand pressed to his scar, having silent conversations with a fragment that was learning to be a person. Luna arranged cushions in patterns that only she understood. Dumbledore watched them all with the expression of a man who had lived long enough to see his deepest beliefs overturned, and had discovered, to his surprise, that he was grateful for the demolition. And Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who had once been the village pariah, the boy who had carried a demon fox and a world's worth of hatred inside him, the boy who had walked into darkness and come out the other side not because he was pure but because he was willing to choose differently. Naruto Uzumaki closed his eyes and reached out to the fox in his soul, and found that the fox was reaching back. "We did it," he said silently. "We started something," Kurama corrected, but there was no malice in the words. Just acknowledgement. The fragments in the other Horcruxes will not all choose as this one did. Some will refuse, some will fight, some will try to destroy their hosts rather than accept transformation. "Then we will deal with them," Naruto said, "one at a time, the way we dealt with you, the way we dealt with this one, by offering them a choice." The fox was silent for a moment. "Then you are still naive." Naruto grinned in the darkness. "I know, that is the point." And somewhere deep in the seal, in the place where a demon fox had lived for 15 years, and was only now beginning to understand what freedom actually meant, Kurama laughed. It was not the cruel laugh of a monster savoring its eventual escape. It was the surprised laugh of a being who had just realized that it had been offered something it never knew existed, and had almost refused it out of spite. "Perhaps," the fox said, "naivety is not the weakness I believed it to be." The torches burned lower. The castle settled into its ancient rhythms. And in the room of requirement, the revolution continued, quiet and patient and utterly unstoppable. The world would learn what they had done soon enough. Voldemort would respond with violence and terror, because violence and terror were the only responses he knew. The Ministry would respond with disbelief and denial, because disbelief and denial were the foundations of bureaucratic power. The magical community would respond with fear and hope in equal measure, because fear and hope were the 2 poles between which all history swung. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, a fragment of a soul had been given a choice, and it had chosen to be free. Tonight, a boy who had been told his entire life that he carried a curse had discovered that he carried something else entirely. Tonight, the rules of magic had changed. And tomorrow, the real work would begin.